I hate technology. I hate it because it hates me. Computer's been fine for the last 3 hours and 2 minutes to 9. Decides it wants to update bloody Firefox, and then Firefox crashes and nothing works. I've got a new internet connection. I had my internet changed the other day, so I shouldn't have that 10:30 hiccup that I've had in recent times. And now my computer goes and plays silly buggers. Anyway, I learned something today. Before I let Saxius and Elfbait in, I learned something today. When you monetize a YouTube channel, they make you jump through all manner of hoops. You've got to prove who you are, you get your content checked, all that sort of stuff. So when it finally comes through, about 10 to 14 days after you start the process, you just go click, click, click. Yeah. That's all fine. Yeah, go ahead, monetize. If you monetize a YouTube channel, never, ever, ever let YouTube decide how many adverts go on. For the last 2 months, up until about 2 months ago, I'd been gaining subscribers at a rate of about 3 or 4 a day, losing 1 or 2 a week. Most new videos would get 300 odd views in the first week or so, and the channel was getting about 200 views a day. Nice. It's not big, it's just ticking over. Then I monetized, and all of a sudden I was getting the same number of new subscribers and losing about just the same amount almost immediately. I was getting very few repeat clicks. People were watching one video and going, and I didn't understand why, and people weren't watching things for very long. And I found out today, if you leave YouTube with its default advert settings and your video is more than about 10 minutes in length, it tries to stuff an advert in every 2 minutes and makes it absolutely unbearable. So I've spent the last few hours going click, 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 getting them down to about 1 every 15 minutes because that's acceptable. 1 every 2 minutes is it's a nightmare. Why do YouTube do it? I mean, surely they want to keep people watching videos, and if you pepper people with adverts every 2 minutes, they're just going to turn the damn thing off. Anyhow, rant over. Welcome, Saxius, and welcome, Elfbait. There we go. Some happier people than me.
Hello, folks.
Hello. Am I quiet, or are both you both quiet?
I think I am quiet.
I may be quiet. I've been wrestling with notification sounds on my PC. You're not the only one plagued by system issues. I can't get it to stop warbling at me every time something happens on my system.
Well, I've increased the volume of my mic now. That should make it a bit better.
Well, look at you, Saxius. You're young. You understand technology. It understands you. Me and Elfbait, we're old. It hates us.
I have no constructive comments.
Yes, Omanal, the goal is to make enough money on monetization to buy new books. But if my channel drops from 200 views a day to 80 views a day, it's a bit of a downward spiral. So I would much rather make £2 or £3 a week and get 200 views a day, and people only have to watch maybe 1 or 2 videos for that, rather than have people just bombarded with nonsense. I mean, I know we need Viagra, but I don't want to be told I need it every 2 minutes. Anyway, I'm wearing a Band-Aid, a plaster in our country. I've broken my glasses when we went camping, and they dug into the skin on my nose, and until I can be bothered to get a new glasses frame, unfortunately, they're going to keep cutting my nose along there. So I'm just padding it out with a bit of protection at the moment. Right. Anyway, thank you to Elfbait and Saxius. I don't know. which of you it was who kept everybody happy and chatting away while I was stuck outside? Well, that's all right. That's all right. We've got 12 people here.
That's pretty strong.
Firstly, any games at the weekend? And well, are there any horror stories to tell from your weekend games?
Horror stories, no. Weekend games, yes. Yes.
No horror stories because no weekend games.
Oh,
2 weeks
the lack of a weekend game
got canceled. So.
well, that's a horror story in itself. I played a game of Merp on Monday night through Roll20, and it's lovely. Okay, it's busy for me, but everyone who was playing said they really enjoyed it. They didn't notice all the tables that I was ploughing through this side of the camera, and it didn't matter. It was really good, really, really good. It runs beautifully on Roll20. Nice and old school and dirty, and lots of viscera flying everywhere, and yes, that's what you want.
You mentioned, I think on a stream at one point, that it kind of takes care of a lot of the busy work that made some people shy away from the system.
Yeah.
Am I coming through okay?
You're coming through very quiet. You're sounding a bit distant.
Weird. All right, let me check some stuff. I'll be back.
Okay. But yeah, there's a lot of tables in Merp. It's a bit crunchy. It's a bit slow, and played at the table, you might want to sit with a calculator next to you. But with Roll20 all set up so that the character sheets do the calculations, it was beautiful. It was really good. It was really nice.
Awesome.
And my players, in true sort of Tolkien-y style, wandered into the village of Archet and helped out a widow with a herb garden because the herbs were needed to make Archet's special variety of cheese.
It's very slice of life.
Here I am.
You're still distant, Elfbait. You're still distant.
So go to the bottom of the screen. You will have your mute, stop cam, and settings.
Oh no!
Go to your.
I got it figured out. It's just it keeps picking up my webcam for whatever reason.
Right. And then the party stepped in and beat up the Dunlendings that were harassing the poor woman because they'd spotted she'd got an old Dunedain blade that belonged to her husband hanging over a mantelpiece, and they wanted that blade.
I actually don't blame them.
Yeah,
That's worth a pretty penny.
But then they got very drunk in the pub, and our party stepped in and beat them up.
All right, I'm back. Any better?
Much better.
Much
that
better.
is such.
Well, now that it's not coming from 2-3 feet away, so
yeah.
All right.
Anyway, we're going to talk about horror stories and problem players. And you said in Discord that you've got a bit of a track record for dealing with problem players, Zaxius. Yeah. So I think I should offer the floor to you to start with, because I think you're going to be one of those.
I don't mess around. Like I have no interest in having trouble players. I really am just going to lay down the law when it happens. And I have a few examples. And a prominent one that I have is the Witcher role-playing game had come out. It was the big hype. Everyone likes the Witcher world. Everyone likes the Witcher video games. I was getting more and more infatuated with it, so I got a hold of the tabletop game, and I scrounged together a group of players. And naturally, the first discussion is, who's going to be playing the Witchers? Are we going to have anything else? So on and so on. We play. We have 2 Witchers in the group, and we make our way through. And we find that the group, I've put it in a time period where there is a massive war that's happening between the kingdom of Temeria and the empire of Nilfgaard. Now, for those who knows about the world, it's a very politically tumultuous time. The south is rife with all of the dark themes that comes with war movies. And in the north, there is a lot of political intrigue. One of the players was then a noblemen and the rules for no not really been fully fleshed out. Once we muddled our way through, I made things up as we went along, and the group settled down for they wanted political intrigue. They wanted to have this one player and basically be like, okay, you are the leader. We are going to be your entourage, your cabal, your fingers throughout the city. And then they built all this up. And this was all organic.
If he's a nobleman, that makes sense, doesn't it?
It completely does. And we had a long history. We had a long sort of like very laughable way of generating characters. This character came from a family where his dad just shagged anything that moved. He had something like 6 siblings, with the majority of them being women, and him being one of the only men of that was legitimate. And then he had 6 bastard or stepbrothers that was just all over the place, and it was anywhere from, well, Doof, you're gonna have to pay some money.
Hold on. You're Scandinavian, Saxius. Can you translate what SEK 100 means? Before I
that's Swedish crowns. That's Swedish crowns. So
how much of that is that in English money?
Give or take £10 off the top of my head. Oh, here we go.
Cheers,
£8 to be exact.
Thank you very much, Doof. Very, very kind of you.
Do not encourage the Swedes.
Has he just been paid? Is that what it? Or he's been looting? He's been pillaging the coast of England, hasn't he?
Yeah. Yes, he's reimbursing it.
Anyway, go back to your story then, Saxius.
So the story basically goes: this player is the nobleman. Everyone's so falling within him, and this is just all the natural way that it's going. And we are having a big event of like they have to get into conflict with the Scoia'tael. They defeat the Scoia'tael, they take the leader captured, and they want to figure out some more information. And then this is where things sort of go off the rail. One of the players decides that I want to be sympathetic towards the Scoia'tael, and I'm going to go down, I'm going to talk to the leader. And because they think that the Scoia'tael in the world is a good and sympathetic group, they release them. Now, for those of you who don't know about the Witcher universe, the Scoia'tael are is an anti-human organization. They're anti-human groups made up primarily of elves, dwarves, and any non-humans. They hate them because humans are terrible to them. It's a dark world. There's a lot of hate going on in these settings. So he goes out and he does something that directly conflicts with the group. And the group has all sitting there going, we have to act the way we would do. So they go through the motions of investigating what actually happened. And then the player catches on that, my time here is up, and decides that he's going to get out of Dodge. And while he's getting out of Dodge, I roll up a random encounter that he encounters trolls. And again, trolls are creatures you can talk to. And this player then decides that he's going to send the trolls in the direction of the players to cause more conflict. And that's then where I lose my cool. And I then have to take him aside and say, I'm not having this. You are now doing direct, not even like player versus player, but you're directly putting other players in the way of harm. You're now doing things that is going to be getting on.
Why he was doing it?
He said it was, yes, he actually did. He said, ooh, trolls, they are fun. And then he went off to basically manipulate the trolls into just heading in that direction, knowing fully well that the other players out of character were looking to do court intrigue, that they were looking to build up this town, that they were looking to cement themselves in this place. And he sent them in that direction, knowing very well that the way he did it would cause conflicts. And his verbal explanation was, it's fun to deal with these trolls because they're dumb and they have to act in a very dumbish way. So I act them out as they should be, and then he does that, and I look at that and go, no, that is not happening. And I take him aside and I just explain to him he's now been doing things that are directly opposed to the group, and I'm not tolerating that. And he says, fine, I'll retire my character. I now want to then come back in and play as a female Skellige warrior. And that's when I kick him. Because I have been, from the very beginning, been stressing what kind of world we're playing in. that The Witcher is going to be very strict in certain ways, and that if you say, for example, I've got no problem if you want to play a female warrior and so on, but you're going to be in an environment where culturally you will be a very out of place character. And if you're from a place called Skellige, that's the equivalent of being a Celt, Irish, or Viking. Like, you're already going to be heavily disliked because you already are going to be associated by being a raider, a rapist, and oh, we can't hear you, elf.
You're a barbarian, basically.
Exactly. You are a barbarian, and you're coming into a very, like, quote unquote, modern place. And
so basically, that whole troll thing was apt, really, because it sounds like this player was a troll.
He was at that very period, and I just went, I'm not dealing with this. This is not what I want to do. Let's take your side, because what you're now doing is, I can't deal with this. You can come back with your current character because the other players know what you have done, and it's the equivalent of letting out an actual terrorist from prison. So you've done crimes against the crown, and the player who's a nobleman, if he doesn't take actions against you, that's his head on the line. So he was causing all these like intermediary like conflicts that would just, if the players were just sitting and going, oh well, it's another player, we just have to let it slide, I would have to bring down the hammer onto the players that were just not playing out the world as it was set up and as all the players that agreed to. So that ended with that, and his follow-up character was then someone that would cause more conflict, and I was just looking, I was like, you have missed the point of our session 0. You've missed the point of our introduction games where we were trying to establish what kind of world you were dealing with, where I tried to show that here is the kind of world we're going to be dealing with. And I did forewarn that I was going to be bringing in themes such as dumb real world, politics, these sort of things, mature themes that you as players would have to accept that this is a part of the game. This is where it is. If you go down to the south where the war is happening, although I won't go into the details, I will be telling you are going to be seeing very, very evil acts of human versus human. And that's I warned them that I would be heavily leading into these themes if they went in that direction. So they've stayed north to avoid them.
And he just seemingly wanted to play a clown game.
I don't know what he wanted to have the adventure of the Witcher going out fighting monsters and all that, which the group as a whole decided that they wanted to do the political intrigue. Fine, that's how it goes. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm retiring my character. I'll find something more fitting for the group, or this is not for me. But instead, he wanted to then make his own fun, despite what the group had established what they wanted. And that's when I just go, I'm not dealing with that. That is not what the group is set up for. And when that player decided that my follow-up character is going to be causing conflicts, all right, get out. I'm not doing a third strike.
So many players just don't want to leave when the game turns to something they don't want to play.
They just want to spoil it for everybody else.
Yeah, or try to, maybe even they're not trying to spoil it, but they're trying to guide it to the way that they want it to be. But it's a very selfish way of playing.
I mean, one of the things, and I've mentioned it a few times, a lot of us who play these games, we're not very good at picking up on social cues a lot of the time. And sometimes you have to be very blunt with players. But it does sound like if you give them that obvious instruction, then they need to learn.
I was very forefront at the very beginning. This is the world we're playing in. I am not house ruling many of these things. The world is pre-established. We have all played the video games. Some of us have read the books. The rules are right here. I am going to put it in a setting that gives us leeway for historical events and for us to then do some things for us to not feel this. But I am setting some parameters that you as players all agree to when you play this.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if you lay down the rules obviously and clearly at the start and they still go against them, then it's their own stupid fault. It is it's quite simple as that. It's the basic respect to the table. The DM suggests something, you all agree to it. Your chance to say, no, I don't want to play this is session 0. It's when you're discussing the game. That's when you say, okay, I'm not really feeling this. And you discuss it. You don't just try and move the game, as you say, in your own direction and force everybody away.
I mean, that's a discussion you have away from the table with the DM and the players going, hey, this is all really cool, but I'd like to at least at some point do this. Because, I mean, what sucks is that Saxius, I'm sure if he came in and told you that he still wanted to do the witch huntery thing while everybody was doing the politics, you'd likely be able to flex. I know you'd be able to flex and like include some of that in there along the way. Maybe some of that politicking is Lord blah, blah, blah says, hey, bring me the head of this critter and then I'll give you the thing you want. So he could have had it if he just decided to communicate.
And I mean, one other point to make is, I mean, it does take time as a DM to learn to when to nip these in the bud and learn to be strong, have the confidence to be strong, have the courage of convictions, and learn when to say no. I mean, my stories, I'm going to come up with 2 or 3 of them center around possibly my own lack of confidence and my own belief that I should try to accept people who have issues, even though this is before I was diagnosed with my issues, but I knew I'd got them. I knew I'd got something, and I always found I was very, very almost a bit of a doormat to people who had issues themselves, and that went on for years and years and years and years and years. And it's only since I really know what's up with me that I think it gives me the strength as well to say, look, I know what I'm like, but I also know how to deal with it.
Yeah, there's strength in knowing your own limitations.
Yes.
Or opportunities, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, but it also means I can recognize these issues in people, and I think I know better how to deal with them now since I was diagnosed. I went through all the various chats with people about them, and I wish I'd known some of that before. Anyway, Elfmate, have you got any stories of things going wrong? Give us one of them, guys. Give us one of them.
Let me start with the big one because you always want to lead strong.
Oh, of course.
And just short form, this is a real world person to person friendship that was ended by D&D. So when I started playing 5th edition, I started playing with a group of friends from work. It was kind of cool because it was my supervisor and a bunch of people from my team, and then a couple of my existing gaming group. And it's kind of funny because it started with the supervisor and one friend, and then suddenly like it was like, "Oh, you're playing D&D? Can I play?" Anyways, so that goes on for a while. One of the guys really became a close friend in real life. Like away from work, away from the gaming table, and so we played for several years across several campaigns. And just one day, I try to ask for feedback from the players in my groups, and I asked for feedback. Hey, as a DM, can you give me some feedback on the current campaign? And so everybody gave me a little bit of this and that, and then he gives me, "There's nothing here for me," and I'm like, what? Anyways, so like that kind of. Anyways, he goes off on this tangent about how in all the years we've been playing together, I have never given him anything or never made anything that he could enjoy in any of the campaigns. Talking years of playing, and me making a lot of concessions for characters of his and all sorts of stuff. Just really goes off on this really brutal and I'm not even afraid to say it, hurtful tirade about, I mean, at one point he just flat out says you're a shit DM, and he even goes so far as to say you've ruined my creativity and my ability to play games for years now. And so I'm not going to take that. It's totally uncalled for. So I start trying to call him on it, and he just gets vile. And eventually I'm like, I'm just trying to understand this because I'm like, yeah. And part of me I have a feeling like if we weren't in the middle of, strict COVID lockdown and we were still in the office and we were still seeing each other day to day at work and stuff, this probably would have never happened. And I know he's got some stuff going on, like me, like you, Geek, he's got some neurodivergent, stuff going on. And
Clearly.
what?
Clearly, yes.
Well, and the thing is, like, I am by no means a strict, we're going to play it my way kind of DM. It was just, he had, the very first game he came in, everybody's making adventurers, and he's like, okay, I want to make this elf from the Elf Kingdom, but I want to be a spy for the Elf Kingdom, and see what's going on with humanity. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then he started playing Secret Squirrel, like, across the table, like trying to keep secrets from the players, and it was really irritating to the point where one of my longtime like been to his kids' birthday parties, for life kind of friends, left the game. And so this last campaign where it exploded was a campaign where everybody was going to play, a 0 level character from the same hometown. And I had already established it was kind of a low fantasy setting, kind of on the edges of the big kingdoms, sort of a frontier sort of a setting. And everybody else made pretty cool characters that were in line with the setting. My wife made a character who was the daughter of the innkeeper. One of my friends in the group made the clockmaker's son, and another player made the local druid's apprentice from the woods next door. And then this guy decides that he's going to make a dragonborn tea merchant, kind of like Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you've ever caught it. But and so I'm like, okay, let's roll with that. So you're kind of an exotic in a town of mundanes. The most exciting thing around here are a couple elves and some dwarves and a halfling. There's a half ogre blacksmith. So there are some. All right, so you've come from afar, you've made this character. And so when we'd be adventuring, when they're going on adventures, I was very keyed into that character. I wanted to make him to where, my wife's character was finding stories to tell because that was her character's focus. She'd grown up in the inn. She was her mother was an adventurer, her grandfather was an adventurer, and that was where she wanted to go. And so, we had some cool stuff going on with the Fae for the druid. And then, the clockmaker's son, he was just your consummate adventurer. Oh, this looks cool. I read this thing in a book, kind of an intellectual, kind of like, we're going on an adventure. And so to make room for this one guy's character, he'd always be like doing herbalism checks, and I would come up with, oh yeah, and you found some of these flowers, or you found some of this herb, they visited a character and the character gave him a recipe for a tea that he'd never had, so very much accommodating. And for him to just go off and just decide that I had never given him anything. Prior to that, he had a character in my nautical campaign who created a faction in the game. It was a cool idea. He's like, I want to make a Polynesian style orc character. I'm like, cool. We can have these guys in this nautical campaign. There's this island chain over here that's on the map that's not defined. Your people can be from there. Tell me how they are. What are your people like? And he played that character. It was really cool. He had, ended up, becoming a warlock with a pact to Dagon, and and all this fun stuff. And just, it was just brutal. You never give me anything, and you're a shit DM. And I'm like, and you're fucking crazy.
And you've done quite the opposite throughout the entire time. You've
been very accommodating for that. Even when they've gone out and like tried to make themselves the exotic character, found something, you've worked that in.
Yeah, the question I always ask myself as a DM when somebody presents me with an oddball character is, I always approach it as, how can I make it fit into the game? You want to make a tiefling in a world where tieflings aren't common? Cool. Are you cool being an outsider who looks like a devil and might have a lot of suspicion laid against him? Okay, cool. But yeah, that's got to be the most brutal one, because at this point, I've been blocked on all social media. We don't talk.
Wow. Just scorch earth, burn bridges, blow
Pretty
up the train
much.
ways.
And,
Yep.
and part of that end resolution goes to me because I basically told them, like, look, I don't have to take this. This is bullshit.
No.
You know, we're friends. I get that you may be unhappy right now, but clearly you're wrong. And
Yeah.
this is why.
No.
I can bullet point everything I've done for all of your characters and stuff like that.
Whenever I DM, I make it clear to my players, like, listen, I try to be lawful in its fullest form, in the alignments. I will be fair all the way through. I will accommodate for what we are trying to do. But we're here for a game. And the moment things starts getting personal or people starts heating up or anything like that, that's where I will fold the gaming screens right down and I will address it. And I mean, if I have to be sounding like someone's father to get them to understand that this is not right, I will.
Yeah, like I had to put a kibosh on the secret squirrel stuff. I told them after that, I'm like, future games, I'm like, there is no player-to-player secrets in this game. It's just too much friction. You can say, my character is doing this stuff. I need you to be outright clear that we're all just speaking narratively and for fun, and make a clear distinction between you and your character's antagonism. From that, we just had to do that going forward. That is like I said, that's the absolute worst tabletop gaming story.
Yeah.
Well, my one, I think I probably mentioned this on a stream before, just sort of when we sort of ramble towards the end, and it's the sort of
like to do.
Yes, and it's the sort of situation which I probably have the foresight now to avoid in the first place. But I played the game, and I'm going to do mine in chronological order. This was my first real recollection of a frustrating player. And I probably didn't deal with it in the best manner. In fact, I didn't at all. I played D&D a lot between the ages of about 13 and 17. 17, I discovered girls and parties and drink and all that sort of stuff. And I went to university when I was just before I was 19. I took my D&D books with the intention of playing again, and never really got them out. And in the first few weeks at university, that's when you make your first friends. And there was this one guy who sort of started tagging on with us. And we were in halls of residence, and there were some snooker tables. And we used to have our dinner and maybe play a frame of snooker or two. And it was very noticeable that in order to win at snooker, this particular guy would be on those tables 4 or 5 hours a day. And then we started going out to nightclubs, and I went to some sort of dark and dingy clubs, and I like very dark and dingy music. And I played a lot of my music that I liked to him. Came back after the first end of year break for the start of the second year, and he was dressed all in black with makeup with dyed hair. So he's the sort of person who would get onto something and take it to the extreme. Everything he ever got into, he would absolutely become obsessed with.
Somebody is ADHD.
Hyperfocus. Yeah. I think there's that. Thinking back to the sort of things he used to do, there's more to it than that.
Yeah,
there's more to it than that. But at the end of the second year, we just finished our exams, and we'd been going out drinking too much, and we got a group of about 4 or 5 of us, slightly nerdy types, and we hadn't. But we did go out clubbing and drinking and whatever, and we'd all spent all of our money. And I pulled out my D&D books, and okay, sure, it's free. And I said, okay, but look, there's still a bit of. We probably still a few exams to go. It was towards the end of the year. I think there might have been 2 or 3 exams left. I said, look, what I'll do, just as a bit of a break to relieve the pressure of all this sort of thing, we'll set up a few characters, and I'll just run a few of these adventures that I've got. I haven't got time to write anything else. I'll just run these adventures, and we'll just meet up, maybe have a can of beer or 2, and just chill. and just play a game without any real stress. And so, of course, he turns up the next day with a copy of the rulebook and a character pre-made. Okay. And I take a look at his character, and his stats are way, way above what they should be. In fact, they're completely illegal. So I have to point all these things out. He's like, he doesn't like it. But there was only me and 3 players. So I thought, look, we're just going to play. And whenever we were playing, he was the one who was the center of attention. It was all me. He was playing an elven mage thief, specifically so he could acquire stuff, get rich, be greedy. Oh, no, I'm playing a good guy. I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy. This 5,000 gold piece ruby that slipped into my pocket, no one knows about that. I'm still a good guy. It's that sort of player. But I just sort of let it fly. It didn't bother me. I was 19. I hadn't played D&D for a couple of years at this time, and it was just nice to be rolling dice again. Maybe I was 20-ish. And he then says to me, I want to invest this money I've stolen. I want to buy a pub or build a pub. I was like, no, I haven't got time. There's exams and things to sort out. And you're playing this adventure. Just stick to this adventure. No, I want to build a pub. How much will a pub cost? And I was like, I don't know. I don't care. I just want to play the adventure. And he was like, and he'd pull out these books and he'd be like, I'll be like, can you go while I do some, I've got revision to do? Be like, and I want to know how much this pub costs. And if I buy this pub, and how can I save money and make maximum profit here? And what do I need to get in terms of staff? What are my staff costs? And what are my supply costs? And can you work out suppliers and all that sort of stuff? And I'll work out profit rates and how much I can charge according to all these. Yeah, and make as much money as possible. And this went on and on and on, to the point where he'd be turning up first thing in the morning. I've been having ideas about my pub. He'd be knocking on my front door, my window, because I was on the ground floor. I'd open the window and be like, oh, all right. Exam tomorrow, yeah. But I've been thinking about my pub. Oh, no, can we just stop? Can we just play the game?
We all want players to be involved in into it between game sessions, but that's crazy.
But then we were actually playing the game. When we were playing the adventure, he was always the one. He was so bossy. He was telling the other all the time, "Well, you do this, you do that. I'm doing this," and he'd be constantly causing trouble, nicking stuff. And eventually, my party walked into a room, and the module describes a loose ceiling. And the one player said, looked at me and sort of grinned, went over, went, I'd like to walk over and prod the ceiling, see if it's hiding anything. Wink, wink. And I just closed the books, and when the ceiling collapses, you all die. That's the end of the game.
Rocks fall, everybody dies.
Rocks fall, everybody dies. That's the end of the game. We'd all had enough.
Yeah, that's one of those weird ones where away from the table behavior that gets into the realm of kind of creepy.
Yeah. He didn't change, though. He didn't change. He was the sort of person who, if you got yourself a girlfriend and he didn't have one at the time, he would tell your girlfriend every bad thing you'd ever done.
That right there is an immediate sign that I cut and burn ties. I don't.
Yeah.
I have since cut and burn ties.
Yeah, like
a little harder when you're going to going to university because you have a kind of a fixed geographic area where you exist most of your life.
Fixed geographic, yes, but I have also. I mean, I've also when I went to university, I've had the occasional player that show up and they play, and I'd start pick up on. Oh no, they are taking pleasure in derailing my games. Great, okay, have a talk to them. And they're like, oh no, but I'm just playing my character. I'm chaotic neutral. I'm just all over the place. I'm like, right. you're now making it hard for me having fun. But yeah, but like, it's like, no, like, I'm not having this anymore. You got to behave yourself. And this talk would have once, twice, and then third time I'd tell him, thank you. You may leave. I'm not having you in my game.
That is
it.
That is the silver lining of
That
not being
but,
in the office anymore.
then, like, simple as, like, they would come in and I'd tell them, thank you. You specifically will now leave because I've had 2 talks with you. I'm not having a third, and you've crossed my line. That's it. Thank you very much. And that's sort of like, you may now go out. I am not here to, like, I get it. Sometimes we need to delve into the books and find out some minutia, and that's fair enough. Sometimes the DM is going to go, no, this is like, we're meant to be in the heat of the moment. We're going to do this. I'll make a ruling. We go and we can discuss the ruling later. That's a normal thing that you do. I don't appreciate it when the player thinks, no, this has to be addressed now. No, I'm not dealing with that. That you do not pump the brakes. You don't go into a train and pull the brakes just because you think you missed a stop.
You just say, well, we'll talk to it after the set. You just say, we'll talk about it after the set.
Exactly. That's exactly what you do. I've had, I think, 4 while I was at university where I just outright told them, you're banned from me being your DM. That's it. And funnily enough, I became the president of the D&D society in that university. So
Like the platform.
Were you an authoritarian president, or were you?
Oh my god, I was such an authoritarian president. I was, mind you, like, I did not care for the wider politics of the university. Like, I came in on the platform of, I have been running D&D for 16 years. I have got experience. I have an unhealthy obsession with Excel, and I will make sure that there are games in this community. I will improve our number of DMs, and there will be fun. This is not a question. This is a direct promise and mandatory. And I won by an absolute landslide.
All right, everybody, drop the dice, or I'll make a spreadsheet. But
you will be happy, troubleshooter. The computer says so.
Listen, we had 3 times as many players. I doubled the amount of DMs with a retainer group of about 50 to 75% on and off DMs. We were nominated. We were nominated, and we won the society, or the club, the university club of that year. Just because I literally made it so popular that other people from other clubs would literally just be like, can we join? We're hearing you're having fun. It's like, yes, of course you can join. Now, here, get out your finger, let me prick it and sign the dotted line.
Here's your robe, your funny hat.
Exactly. And we're not too far. I'm not too far away from Stonehenge either, so the blood sacrifices are all in good order.
I haven't said hello to everybody in chat tonight, but I'd like to welcome Gut Boy. I don't think I've seen you before. I've seen this before.
Oh, dice finaglers, those guys who find either they roll and snatch them up, or they don't actually roll them, they just drop their dice. So
yeah,
or even they roll them and they see they've got a good number and say, my character would like to do this.
I had to laugh though. We had a guy come to our battle, a longtime player of our BattleTech game, back, talking miniatures games, not RPGs, but and he was a long-time player, and he actually did this just for a laugh. He managed to get a set of those character builder dice that were all 5 and 6s. Remember those back in the day? And so in BattleTech, of course, rolling high is good. And so he came into play, and on an absolute critical roll in the game, he somehow managed to roll oh no, it wasn't character builders, because he ended up rolling snake eyes. He was using loaded dice. And he ended up rolling snake eyes on these loaded dice at the most inopportune moment, where only you can roll snake eyes on loaded dice. And he had horrible dice luck, so it was just amazing. if I never believed in dice luck or dice juju or dice mojo or whatever you want to call it, that made me believe, because clearly he had pissed off the dice gods when you come in with cheater dice and you still roll like shit.
Dice gods go, ha ha, lightning bolt.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Character builders are a whole other thing. We did catch a guy using those to make characters once before, and that was no, you're not playing anymore.
One thing my player had done is he'd rolled things like exceptional strength for a mage thief, and he'd gone beyond the level of the strength limits for an elf allowed anyway, and all that sort of stuff, and then tried to argue that he should have that because he'd rolled it. And even when his character died, he says, "I'm going to use those same stats to make another character." And we were like, "Well, we're not playing again." anyway, let's move on. Let's have Saxius next.
Time for me to talk about how much of a problem player I am when I am not controlled.
We're gonna jump to that already. I'm not ready. So
That's fine.
I may have another tale of woe based on somebody else, but
that's fine. Do you want me to hold back on these?
No, go for it. If it's in your mind.
No, I figured I've talked about the problem players that I've had and how I have a very short fuse dealing with them, and that I generally give them a warning, sort of a second warning. There are no third warnings in my DMing style, purely because if you reach that point, you've pissed me off enough that I block you, and I just look at you and go, being in my games is a privilege that I can revoke from you. It's none of rights. You don't have any, demand for being in here. I choose who plays, and if I enjoy it, I want you to stay, and I will do everything I can to make sure it's enjoyable for you to stay.
You do the work. You do
exactly. The work. Yeah. Now, for me as a player, and I talk to the DM in a joking fashion these days, we have come over it. It's a joke between me and him. We have reconciled, and we've gotten over how bad I was. We played Stars Without Number. Basically, sci-fi, the universe has kind of collapsed, the economies are all over the place. It's a little bit like playing in Firefly. You've got a ship, and you are heavily in debt. It's like owning a house. You've got a massive mortgage, an interest rate, and you have monthly payments that needs to be done.
Sounds fun.
Oh, I loved it. Good God. So I was in a group. We had our usual sort of divvy up. We had the guy who was the mechanic. We had the fighter or the soldier who would also double up as our pilot. There would be me who would be kind of our computer guy, and I would also be the accountant, even though I was not allowed to use the books that actually gave me accountancy, which annoyed me. And we had a face, our salesman, who would also double up as our lawyer when we needed him. So everyone had a role, everyone had a double back that we could fall back onto, and we had all this sort of set up. Now, I have probably said this before. I work in shipping. I work in logistics. This is my bread and butter because the entire game revolves around you going from planet to planet, from system to system, picking up jobs, haggling about the money, making the most profit, feasibly, and trying to get out after all the complications that you inevitably are going to make. I found out how much cargo we can actually have. I began calculating how much we should be able to store. I made a spreadsheet, surprisingly, to start calculating around and documenting, and specifically, I was keeping as close of track as the months, days as the DM, down to when we were hired, how many days we spent in space, how much fuel we burned during that time, when we resupplied, how much we were on, and keeping all of these accountancies going. I was the person who actually asked for the receipts when the other players went on a shopping spree, because I wanted to then go in and ask the DM, like, tax returns. Can we actually file for that?
But you would have quite enjoyed building a pub in my old D&D.
See, I've already told you how I've done it with the other player, how he's making his own little barge system, how he's doing this, and he's having all of these other things. I am absolutely ecstatic, and I built all of this in this specific game. And I told the DM ahead, hey, I want to make sure that I take over the hard work of all of the paperwork for this, because you're going to have so much to do as a DM. I want to take some of it away from you. So if I take over and I make sure that I'm honest about how much air we have, I'm honest about how much food we have, I will document it to a T, which I did, and I will make it absolutely public for you and everyone to see, and I will only give you, the DM, the rights to amend it wherever you want, because I won't let the players mess it up, but I'll let the DM to go in and do whatever adjustments that they believe needs to be done, because I'm not going to argue on that. The biggest argument fell down to this. I began arguing or trying to haggle about the tonnage that we would get and how much that should translate into us having a job and how much we should be paid. That is not how this game works. The game is meant to be, we get a job, the DM tells us how much we are being paid, we can haggle to bring it a little bit up and a little bit down. I don't come in and start telling the seller or the person who wants to be our customer, here's how much it's going to cost you. That's not how it works. It's a sort of, it's not a seller's market, it's like a buyer's market. So it's the complete reverse. The price is set. I then decide whether or not I want to go for it. But that didn't translate into me because of my real world experience and my obsession with basically working the spreadsheets. And that led to a long sort of like drawn out between me and that DM, since it made it less fun for him because he would do the right thing, which is, Oscar, shut up. Not shut up. But after the game, I would approach him and say, is this anything that you're willing to talk about? And if he said no, I would really be sitting there going, I want to talk about it. I'd be like a weirdo outside the windows going like, hello, can I be let in? But I didn't bother him beyond that.
At the table, you were probably like tap, 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 tap.
Oh, yeah. And the table was terrible. But again, I'd be sitting there just like, and literally just biting my thumb because like it annoyed me, but I wouldn't argue there and then. But we laugh about it these days. It's an ongoing joke. The DM has actually taken up my interest in spreadsheets and found that it's actually really useful because he runs games where he has huge quantities of information and things that happens at the same time. So I've helped him that way, but at the time he preferred a more sort of Marvel cinematic style theme to it, whereas I was numbers. Crunch, 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 crunch.
See, I mean, I do play with spreadsheets sometimes for fun. But I don't bring them into RPGs. You may have noticed in Discord. I mean, I mentioned it. I seed rallies, motorsport events. I've got a spreadsheet which has got almost all of the English and Welsh gravel forest rallies from the last 13, 14 years, all the individual stage times of all the competitors, all listed, and each competitor that's competed in those 13 years has got a ranking and a rating, and organisers get in touch with me and send me their entry lists and say, John, can you put these in order for us? So yeah, I do that.
Yes.
I do that. And so you probably, it's something I get paid for it as well. Only a small amount, but tell you, I do get paid for it. I get free tickets, like a rally in 2 weeks' time. Free tickets to go. And I look at the cars. Marvellous. Anyhow, welcome home, Al. Sorry we didn't say hello when you first joined in, but Saxius was in full flow.
Well, I don't want to interrupt. That's why I'm like, okay, I'll just hear quietly and then make sure that I can see the chat on my computer and turn off the sound so you don't hear that from my tablet here. So, but yeah, if we're going to talk about bad incidents, I'm trying to think of, and almost all of them are when you're young. So let's see. One of them was, let's see, the player that always wants to PvP as, you know, his first encounter with all the other characters. Like, really? And then you're like, oh, he comes in and he starts, well, I'm going to kill off your characters. And we were both min-maxers, but I knew how to min-max a little bit better than he did. So I killed him. Well, I'm sorry. He played minus 10 hit points. And so I would knock him down and then I would use healing or whatever to bandage him up. And then we would go on with the adventure. And this seemed to happen with way too many players. There's one. No, that's one. Talking about some of my problems. Oh, look, we're going to roll a 10-sided die. Let me spin the die on the 2 to 10, side, so I have a better chance of getting double zeros. So I remember doing that. I think I'm trying to think of some other bad ones we've had. My other what not really a bad player, but the player that will never stick with one character. Every game session he wants a new character.
Yeah, they exist. They do exist, and I've been guilty of wanting to play new characters. We all have from time to time, but they want to do it all the time. It's a pain. And I think Mike, a few good points in chat here. Yeah, I remember those days when we'd struggle to get 3 or 4 people together. So if somebody said, "Yeah, I want to play," you'd be like, "Yeah, come and play." You'd take in anybody. Thankfully, it's not like that nowadays. But yeah, and good friends don't always mesh. They can sometimes be the worst players.
I have a bit of a story on players wanting to have a new character all the time.
Yeah.
If we got time for another one,
Go on then.
So, good friend of mine, still a good friend of mine. So clearly not a problem. But he, back in 2nd edition, he was very enamored by a lot of the options that were coming out in the various Splat books, and so was frequently asking to change to whatever flavor of the week. But it started with a simple samurai type character. We had actually started out with Oriental Adventures characters that were traveling in the non-Asian, basically travelers from afar, right? So, and he had a warrior monk character, Sohei, and he died. I mean, he just had this bad habit of dying all the time. So I could understand wanting to make a new character all the time, but he would never really commit to these characters. So this character, the Sohei, was like his 2nd character in the campaign, and I was willing to give him a try because he died. I mean, when you get swallowed by the giant lizard that the lizard man leader was riding, and then the other player in the party, the samurai in the party, kills the lizard man, and so the mount decides to flee while you're still stuck in its mouth and goes underwater to swim and you drown. There's really no saving your character, right? And so, and I'm like, oh yeah, cool, make another character. And he came up with, he's like, okay, so the complete book of giants or something like, or humanoids or whatever had come out, where they allowed the Firbolg character for the first time, the old school Firbolgs. And he was like, oh, I want to play this giant. It's a good giant too. It's a good aligned giant. Can I play it? I'm like, all right, cool. I'm like, you can play him, but understand you might have some limitations because you're beyond large. I think they were like just tall enough to be beyond large, if I can recall correctly. But yeah, so he's way big, but they have the ability to shrink down. And he insisted on playing this character. I'm like, you don't get that ability to your higher level. You don't, you're not going to be able. He's like, oh no, it's fine. I'll play it. So I already had the next dungeon figured out, and they're traveling, and it's caves, and he can't fit in the cave. So he spends the entire game just sitting there. They're kind of moping and being all gloomy at the table because his character's sitting out there watching the door to the dungeon while everybody else is delving deeper. And I'm like, dude, just that same player though. I have another story about him, but we'll continue on. Let's round robin it.
on the PvP thing, I mean, I've played in plenty of games where there've been little niggly conflicts between characters, but certainly this has been with adults, and we've always just been careful just never to let them get out of hand and for them to be almost role play options. I played how sometimes you play your own traits a little bit in your characters. I played a necromancer wizard, and I've mentioned him lots of times. I used to love my necromancer and hate him at the same time. And what I did is I took my most pedantic and frustrating traits and made an absolute mockery of them and made the character just in the extreme. He was And he was a pain in the backside, a proper pain in the backside. He was very pedantic. He'd get frustrated. He would he'd sometimes be very, very much my way or the highway from time to time. And one of the other players was playing a very flashy fighter, a very show-offy fighter, who kept getting us into trouble because he was overconfident of his own abilities. It was a very interesting character, completely suboptimal. He wore no armor, but yet he was a hand-to-hand fighter because he believed that putting armor on would stop people seeing his beautiful clothes. The first thing he'd do when he get into town is spend a lot of money on a haircut and make his hair look. He wouldn't wear a helmet or anything because he had this beautiful hair, and he'd be like, he wouldn't even have a shield. He'd go waltzing into combat, and I think he had about a strength of 9 and a constitution of 10 or something like that. He didn't have many hit points. His armor class was useless, and he was always getting us in trouble. And my character was like, I'm sick to death of you. You keep getting us in trouble. And if the world was to lose this brain that's in my head, the world would be a poorer place. You are getting us in trouble. You are risking the world losing the greatest brain ever known to society. And he was like, I don't care about your brain. Look at my hair. Look at my clothes. And it was all flash, all that sort of swish or something. There was banter going on. And I was like, okay, I'm going to cast Produce Flame on his hair. Oh, the DM was like, what? I said, yeah, I'm going to cast Produce Flame on his hair. I'm not going to cause any damage. I just want to singe it. So it was like, okay, there was a smell of burning hair, and the tips of your freshly cut hair, that expensive haircut and dye that you've had, it all sort of blackens. It all looks a bit out of shape. And the fighter player goes, I know exactly where that came from. I know exactly where it came. I turned around and I stabbed the professor in the foot with my rapier. And Dean was like, okay, Professor, you deserve that. You take 1 point of damage. Right, okay, let's get on with it then. And we just got on with the adventure. We were about level 5 or 6. So 1 point of damage didn't matter. A little Produce Flame on his hair didn't matter. And it was all done with a big smile on our faces. And we just got on with the adventure. It was just water under the bridge after that. I don't mind those little things when they're done sort of just playfully. But it's when it's serious.
But that's what I want. The problem is that most players don't know how to do it. It's just like the problem is that they want to, until we fight till we're 0 hit points. Now, I don't have any problems to say, you know what, we're going to get some fists. Like, okay, you guys are going to fight until one knocks out the other or something. Like, all right, I don't mind a little bit of stuff like that, but it needs to be neutral. The problem that I had was, and I saw this several times, someone gets bored of the adventure and suddenly decides to go berserk. And they decide that they're just going to kill off the rest of the party completely out of character, everything else. And as a DM, the first thing I do is I'd say, stop taking your character sheet. You're out of the game. We're not interrupting and having everyone else die because you decided to flip somehow. And they're like, I said, I don't care how it affects the rest of the game. You just suddenly disappear from the world. You're gone, and we'll just pretend you never existed. I had
I would say you have to be quite mature, experienced gamers to be able to just sort of deal with it as role play and keep the effects down to such a minor level that they don't hamper everybody.
Even with experienced role players, I found that some people just can't handle the PvP. I've run 2 specific evil campaigns where we basically set off the whole thing off, right? You're evil, you're out to do greatness, you're part of this, and so on. You want to break out and become your own thing. That devolved very quickly into scheming. The first attempt, I encouraged it because it was supposed to be, okay, everything sort of dive from me, you do your things, you go out and you do your thing and so on, and you work towards the greater goal of being evil. But it quickly turned into backstabbery, lies, conspiracy. It became to the point of where some players try to, in real life, manipulate one another, and that's where that's where it took too far, and that soured that group for a bit, and then we reconvened, did some other things, tried it again, and the outcome was just as abysmal, even though I had to rein back in many of the other aspects from the previous game. The problem then became that they decided that they were going to do decisions and make alliances and enemies of one another. Again, it became an internal conflict rather than an external conflict, and that's just where I find that once PvP is introduced, that turns attention inwards towards internal conflict, and that will not end well. And yeah, like Owl said, I'll stop the game. As I've done. I've had once in the last year where someone tried to do PvP. Now, the reasoning for that situation was new player into an established group. The established group has this thing of we talk a lot of banter, we talk crap, like it's an ongoing joke in that group that Oscar can't roll dice. He has got no worthy monsters, and all in all of his encounters are an absolute joke because I can't get him a decent health point. Things like that, I can take it. I don't care. It's fun. There's a little bit of chips coming to the new player's way to sort of like induct him in. And he takes it personally, which, okay, I pick up that he's not liking it. So I try to sort of go like, okay, guys, let's not do that. But apparently it stung so much that he turned around and said his character now attacks another player. At which point I then have to say, okay, this is now not fun, because it was an innocent thing that was misinterpreted. That's not a bad player. It's not even a horror situation. It's just a case of it could have gotten so much worse. But DMs have to pick up on these things. You've got to read the cues and the signals, especially when you've got new players in. And
the whole idea, I mean, you say about running potentially evil games, that almost leads into the comment I put up here, where I find that if you've got an evil game, having players going against each other, the players will often act on things that their character wouldn't know. When characters are scheming against each other, it's like would your character really know that other character is involved in this scheme? Probably not. But I mean, it depends for me. With Gut Boy's comment here, it depends on the system. I don't mind running quite puzzle-based AD&D games, such as Tomb of Horrors, White Plume Mountain, where the players are expected to push their own knowledge to the full to complete the adventure. It's just a different style of playing. Obviously, if you're playing a much more story-based game, it's not ideal for every group. But the old Funhouse dungeons were designed as player tests rather than character tests. It depends. It depends on the game. It depends on the game system.
I'm going to bring up this. We're all talking about anti-PvP. I did have one instance where I had a couple of friends. One decided to play kind of a fighter. We were using Mage for World of Darkness, and one was playing a fighter type, and another one was playing the Mage type. And the Mage type couldn't do too much, but he was a lot smarter. So the fighter type, they're trying to get into a castle, and so he decides to shoot his arrow, get it across, and then he has to, use it as a tightrope. And so he's about halfway through, and the Mage character decides to grab the rope and start shaking it and said, "Hey, let's start talking about my share." And, well, to be fair, the fighter type was a bully. So I thought it was hilarious when he did this. The other thing was, speaking of which, the Mage guy could write in several different languages. So every time that they would go on an adventure, he would write the adventure, so he was the hero, and the fighter was absolutely worthless and a dunder. And every time that he tried learning a new language, he'd switch to a different one. So he's like, "Oh, I'll know Latin." He's like, "Well, I'm going to try learning Latin." He says, "Well, now I'm doing Greek." And so he was always falling behind in experience points, trying to learn whatever language he was. Anyway, that was a fun instance, and I didn't mind that too much. But that was one of the more interesting times that went into it. Is they both played into it, and it was actually really fun to listen to it because, you know, it's not on what you do; it's what's written about that everyone takes as fact. So I found that.
I have a couple of fun PvP stories, or at least I think they're fun.
Oh, go on then.
So one is a quick one, and that's back when we were going through Temple of Elemental Evil. I think we were still in AD&D back then when we were doing this. We ended up with.
Were you the DM or the player?
I was a player in this one.
I just feel sorry for any DM who ever runs that adventure.
But this was an interesting run through because we had actually had two game groups come together to players from two different game groups come together to play this. Now we'd all played before, played together at one point or another. But I was running a way over level Cavalier, and was basically being used as the meat shield.
The battering ram. You were
pretty much, yeah, because I had all the hit points and the plate mail and everything. But we also had a psionic thief and a psionic assassin in the party.
Right.
So these guys spent most of the time in the dungeon using their abilities to mess with the other party members, stealing equipment, at one point concealing a monster from a player, and it was horrible. And then right before we rushed into a room, one of them had used, I think, telekinesis or something while he was invisible, using psionics, of course, to steal my Cavalier's sword. So I'm about ready to rush into this room, and he takes my weapon, and that's how my Cavalier lost his hand. I was trying to fight brutally with some sort of monster that had some sort of rot ability if you touched it. So
right,
yeah. So that was a fun one. That game ended before we got through that adventure. The other fun PvP one was actually I enjoyed, and I was the DM, and the rest of the party was actually amused by it. So it wasn't a horror story. It could have been. So the party is in the city. A merchant has hired the party to save his daughter, who has taken to visiting with a demon lord on a weekly basis in a room at an inn. It's a pretty high level party. So in that party, we had a Cavalier, we had a demon slayer from one of the Roll Aids books, a high level wizard, a thief, and I believe a cleric also. Yes, the cleric is because the cleric is the bad guy in this one. So a cleric of a death god, and we're playing second edition because he was a priest. Anyways, they had devised this really great plan where they were going to ambush this demon lord when he went to visit her. So they had the thief dress up and disguise himself as the merchant prince's daughter and lay under the covers in bed. The wizard had stocked the broom closet down the hall with all the components he needed to summon a water elemental, like big casks full of pure water and everything like that. The Cavalier was invisible by the wizard and in the room with like a mace of disruption or something like that. And the demon slayer was also in the room, concealed. And so the idea was when the demon lord appeared in the room, they were gonna jump him. So while they're all planning this, I get a note from the cleric who's like, I'm gonna be in the town cemetery raising as many dead as I can. Now, mind you, they're high level at this point, so he can raise quite a few. And I'm like, what, to like fight the demon lord? He's like, nope, I'm gonna wait till they're done with the demon lord and weak and send the army of the dead against the players. Send it against the rest of the party. He's like, I want to get in good with my god, so I'm going to do an evil act of using the dead. What was fortunately my players were all cool, and they're like, that was funny, because it probably helps that they were so well prepared for the demon lord that he appeared, and in like 2 melee rounds they had managed to dispatch him because Mace of Disruption. And so yeah, high level game. They were able to beat him. So when the Army of the Dead showed up, the wizard had a freshly summoned water elemental that he had nothing else to use on. So.
Yes, so I'm guessing the cleric got destroyed. I mean, in that sort of situation, I might be tempted to say, right, after this encounter, that if your cleric survives, he is now an NPC. He is now one of the big bad guys. That might be a way of approaching that.
I'm trying to think of, well, there's problem rules in certain cases, but and they're high level. High level seems to always be weird because everyone knows what's going on. But I definitely, and sometimes they do that just because they get bored. I think that's the problem all too often. I'll tell you what I really hate are players who obviously see the hook. They know what's going there, and they decide to intentionally ignore it and then complain that there's nothing to do. That's, or they always want to fight the NPC that's saying, that's supposed to do some monologue, and they do a monologue, and they're like, I'm going to fight them. Why are you trying to fight this, 10th level character? And this is what I saw with my friend. Now, of course, it was his brother-in-law. I said, I would have just killed him. I've always gotten so tired of these characters. Like, you know what? I'm just going to pinch the king's nose. I'm like, in my game, I'll ask you once. If you do it again, then you're dead. And say, okay, now go roll up a new character. It was
hold on a moment, Owen. Now, just bear with me. Sure. Becky, the internet can probably hear you in the background.
Just to join you?
Just to let her know, just a reminder that I'm streaming. Anyway, keep going.
Well, I can hear her.
We can all hear you, Becky.
Is she going to get her own mic after this? No.
Does she have any horror stories of her own?
Oh, plenty of horror stories about me, yeah.
You said DM horror stories, not dad horror stories. Although I guess you are the dungeon master of her life.
I mean, but that's what always gets me is these players who think, I'm just going to fight whatever major NPC. Stop it. The other part is, don't try joking, and I understand people want to talk about, well, I'm just going to do this like it's a Three Stooges game. I went, well, if you want to play Three Stooges, just let me know beforehand. But whenever I'm the DM, I'm like, do you really want to do that? Yes. I said, okay. They do X, and I'm like, you're rolling a new character. Like, what? I told you. What do you think was going to happen? You just don't do those things.
I think we've just been mentioning it in chat. I think when players get silly, when they break out the PvP, when they get daft or suicide or whatever, just arrange a session of paranoia. Let them get out of their system. And after they've all died lots of times and backstabbed each other and had fun calling each other commie traitors and whatever, then go back to something sensible.
Just throw Ravenloft Purple Mist at them. Just throw that at them. If they want to start burning down the world around them and do PvP, okay, I've got just a world to send you to.
As a player, one of my really bad traits I remember as a kid was being a rules lawyer, up to the point that it didn't even matter. And in some cases, I would make up rules, but since people didn't memorize the books as well as I did, they couldn't argue as much. and it's bad when you go like, well, I'll show you where it is. And remember, this is the day before we had PDFs where we could just Control F. It was on page 104. It says this. Yeah, ignoring the fact that page 106 it completely dispels whatever you just argued in 104. But that was, and it did a better game. And as I've gotten older,
you mature.
That's it. Now shall we go back to a few juicy horror stories? I'm going to mention one where I was a player in this game. Again, I think we probably chatted about this in after stream type stuff. I was a player in this game, and we were playing basic D&D, and there was only 4 of us in the group. Very experienced DM, very relaxed. We were playing we were renting a room in a shop. Just want to sort of £10 for 3 hours for the room, all chip in. buy a few drinks at the shop just to keep the shop going. And we had ongoing issues filling our fifth and maybe our sixth seat at the table. So we let the shopkeeper put up adverts for people to join our group. And it was very clear that we were mature gamers playing an old school system. And if anyone was interested to join in the game, then just let us know. And so one week, this new guy comes. He's answered the ad, and he comes along. He's a lot younger than us. He's a big guy, big guy. But he's about half our age. And the DM says, "Okay, we're playing basic D&D." He's, "Oh, I haven't played that system." I said, "Oh, okay. Everyone's still first level. And I would say, yeah, we're very weak. So what we're doing is we're playing very, very carefully. We're doing a sort of, it's a sort of almost like a fetch and carry mission where we're trying to find old artifacts and bring them back to the college in the town. And we're being paid to retrieve them, trying to avoid trouble because we're not very strong. I think I'd got a magic user with 1 spell and about 3 hit points. There was a cleric with dexterity of about 3. And there was a halfling in the party. And I think that was our party. And this player says, okay, he rolls some stats. Says, okay, I'm going to be a Celtic fighter. Okay. And he was a grave robber. Okay. And the DM's like, the DM should have said no. At that point, should you say no? Roll a sensible character or no. But we let him play, just give him a chance in this one session, and we go creeping into the archaeological dig area and into these tunnels, looking for these artifacts for the local college. And whenever anything, most of what we were encountering were wandering monsters. Whenever we took our time, and he'd just go charging in. Hack and slash, and the dice were with him. He was surviving, and we were like, no, we're trying to be quiet. We're trying to avoid all this sort of trouble. We're trying to get the loot out, because that's what we get paid for. And we're saying to the player, that's where we get the most XP from as well. That's in terms of advancing our characters. That's where we get the most XP. We don't want to get involved in all these extra fights. But the whole session just went on, and every time he started a fight, he would sort of look at us and be there like, as if to say, I dare you. I dare you to say anything. I dare you. Because he was a big guy, very imposing. Thirst versus Howl, it's player versus player. So players fighting each other. And he was almost daring us to intervene with the way he was playing. And it got to, we were finishing the session at 3:00, and it got to about, I don't know, was it 5 o'clock? And it got to about 10 to 5. And we opened up this one sort of it was obviously the last room in this sort of crypt area. And the DM described this dark, cold presence emanating from a stone sarcophagus in the room with very sort of Cthulhu-esque black tendrils coming out of it. And we were like, well, there's going to be some big loot in there, but no, thank you. No, that thing looks scary. And of course he goes, I draw my sword because there's going to be a loot in there. I'm going to run in. I'm going to take it on. And we went, and we sent to the DM, and we closed the door behind him and walked back to the college, happy with the loot that we've got. And we packed up our books. Thank you for the session. And he was never invited back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's the way you do it. I'm not knocking that at all.
So, yes, we did act against his character, but only because his character had continually acted against us the whole time. And I think that's what a sensible group of adventurers would do when faced with a loose cannon like that, who's new, they've got no ties to. You make your bed, you lie in it. Bye.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned Grave Robber as a starting character, and the first thing I thought was Warhammer Fantasy. So I said, let me go check, and yep, they have a character, basically a starting profession of Grave Robber.
Oh, you can be like a rat catcher and stuff in that, can't you? But
Oh, it's got agitator, barber, surgeon, hunter, hedge wizard. I mean, it's different levels, but yeah, that's one of the things I always liked about it was you could definitely start out this. Well, everyone just remembers rat catcher because that's memorable, but it's. But yeah, I just remember grave robber. You don't start off as this great, warrior at the beginning. You kind of start off as, some.
You're a peasant.
Yeah, it was. It's like, oh, okay, you're 18 or 19 years old and you're going to go out in the world. Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that does, those sort of things help bring the game down to earth at the start. And I think at the start that really helps because you realize your own fragility.
Oh, yeah.
It gets you in the right mindset for low-level, gritty play.
And with Warhammer, I think that you start off with anywhere from would be about 4 to 10 hit points, depending on how tough you are. And then as soon as you hit 0, it starts critical.
You start losing arms, legs, eyes, permanently broken, lungs punctured, blood poisoning. Yeah.
These sort of things happen in MERP as well.
Yeah.
I think
but
Warhammer was definitely inspired by those MERP critical tables.
All right, let's see. Some of the things, since we said that, we're going to consider DMs bad players too. I remember Shadowrun we were playing. We're in the middle of combat. We're trying to decide what to do. And it's okay, I want to do this. And all of a sudden, all these guards come in. I'm like, where the hell did they come in? He says, well, it took you 40 minutes. I'm like, the combat only took 2 minutes. And we were yelling at each other for that reason. And okay, someone did not communicate what the time range was going on here. And while we barely escaped, it was one of those that's one of the things you always have to be careful of.
Yeah, that's communication. That's the DM say failing to hurry people along and not tell people that if they make a lot of noise around the table, it means their characters are making a lot of noise.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to make noise, but I meant it was so fast. I went, there wouldn't be a reaction team here fast enough. He's like, oh no, you took a long time. Like we've gone through 3 rounds of combat. That's nothing. So yeah, that's one of those things that you have to look at. So there was that problem. I remember the other one, which is we're playing a BattleTech game, and so we all create our characters, and then he wanted his characters, which were all of the important characters in the game, to do it. And he's like, all right, so we play a game of BattleTech, and then that was it. No role-playing. I feel cheated. And not only that, your players, your NPCs are more important than us as players. So that was another one.
Someone mentioned about stealing from thieves stealing from party members. The way I stop them doing that is I have quite a simple rule that when the party are out adventuring, all loot in their possession is party loot. So if the thief steals from another player character, he's stealing from party loot and putting it straight back into party loot. He can roll as many pickpockets as he likes. It's going to have no effect whatsoever because it's not going to be personal loot until the adventure's over.
And I like that actually myself. It's like, okay, so you pickpocket, and to me, it's more of a joke. It's like, oh, I'm going to put an orange in your pocket, and then come out and say, oh look, you had this all the time. Yeah.
I did once play a thief and pickpocket one of my own party members and then buy a round of drinks at the bar with their money.
Seen someone use pickpocket to give them something that they needed, but they knew that the character would not accept it because it was stolen goods from other NPCs. So they're like, well, you need to have these items because you're the good guy in this group, so you will just magically have them. And it will be divine intervention or something like that.
That's
anyway,
good use of pocket.
Yes. In terms of horror stories, I have a friend and a former player where every time pickpocket came up, he would always say he didn't mind that if the thief pickpocketed his character, but he would always stress that if his character caught the thief pickpocketing him, he would beat it out with the punishment of the medieval times, which was chopping off the hand. So that was just where it was just okay. So you want to do this if someone else does that, and it's just going to immediately make that other character practically either not necessarily so much useless, but it will severely hamper their usefulness as a rogue or as a skill oriented character. It's like, okay, I did not know how to really feel about that, but it never really got up because I've always laid down hard that I don't want PvP, I don't want internal conflict, so it never really happens. But it's just I know that this one player almost is sitting itching for that one person to get caught doing something to him so that he can be like, oh, I get to do this now.
Well,
that's when you break out paranoia. So they're encouraged to do that.
I'm trying to think of, if we're going to, talking about problem players and problem DM. I remember when I first learned about 1 XP equals, 1 gold equals 1 XP, and I rushed these characters up to 40th level super fast. And I said at a certain point, you're just not leveling anymore. that was how I stopped that. But, when you're a kid and you're playing every day, and they start getting strong enough to start fighting dragons in their lairs, you can get XP pretty fast. So
we had a player who tried to gain XP by basically going to small, innocent, unprotected villages and giving them gold that he had already acquired and already got XP on, and then going and raiding the village for the XP for the gold again. I'm like, I got to give you credit for a good idea, but please stop.
It will work
I dealt with
once.
it in the campaign. I dealt with it in the campaign world too. I'm like, you're a criminal now. You can't go anywhere.
All right, back to trouble players. One player that I had would always play the wizard, ideally. He would, as soon as you hit level 5 or 6, go for fireball, and then that would become his solution.
As it often does, all too often.
As it often does. Now, what ended up happening in this situation was the group had decided that they wanted to be cheapskates, and they had arrived very late at the tavern and gone like, oh, can we just have the beds? Can we fetch the coin and pay you tomorrow? It's like, yeah, that's fine. Like the innkeeper was just like, it's fine, just take the beds, come over here. Very nice guy, rolled up some lovely personality. What's it called? Lovely personality traits from him. So I was like, yeah, no, he's a nice, he's not had too much trouble in his life. And the players just went, oh, okay, we're going to take advantage of that and just not pay. We're just going to run off. The following morning, just completely ignore that the fact that he's saying you have to pay now. It's like, nah, we don't. We're just going to leave. All right. Well, that guy is a cared and liked person in the town. So the tale went out. Some people went, we're not going to have that. They rode out and they kidnapped one of the players and took him back. So it's like, you're going to pay. This is quite simple. So you're either going to pay in your equipment, your money, or your flesh. Which, again, I'm using very old laws for that. So they were in the middle of stripping this one character of their stuff to evaluate for that being paid up. And the players, of course, returned back because they're just going like, well, you don't kidnap one of us. They open the door and the wizard, of course, shouts, fireball. And I just look at him and go, okay, roll damage. Does that. I look to the other player and go like, you're in the room where the fireball went off. So you're going to die. You're going to take this full damage, which killed him. And from there, it just became a bit of a show. After the place burned down, the players decided that we're not going to help it. We're just going to make it worse. Light torches, throw something around, make a big fuss of it, run off. And that's when I had to sort of turn to the group as a whole and ask them, is this okay for you? Like, are you aware of what you're doing here? Like, let's actually stop and evaluate what your choices are. And the fact that all of you have now pitched in, and I do mean all of them, all 7 of them with the exception of the one guy who died, but he was laughing and egging on the other guys, the other players, for them to sort of like, yeah, no, let's fucking make it worse. And the players are like, we're sure we can survive. We can take on what's thrown at us.
That would be when the local order of Pelor would summon their finest paladins with their fine white armored steeds and come down and hunt these murderers and outlaws.
Yeah, and add in Saint Cuthbert and Heronius. Those were the paladins that came after them. And I just went, guys, this is who's after you now. This is the levels they're at. Do you really want to play this out? Because I don't. It's just going to be sour in my mouth. So let's just accept the fact you've done something that is leading you down a certain path. That path has got two outcomes. Either you survive because my dice were terrible, or you die and we all have a terrible time. Like, it's not going to be fun either way. So we had to do a hard restart.
Yes, yeah. A restart is probably the solution to that one. I think going back to problem players, my most again, I've probably mentioned it before. While still trying to fill that fifth seat at that table, and this was us being too soft again. A guy joined us, and initially he was okay, bit loud, bit mouthy, had some strange ideas. And as his confidence grew, he became more vocal with his ideas, and he was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and he was a bit of an idiot, and he was very vocal, and he started arguing over rules misconceptions that he had. I mean, we'd show him the rule book, and he'd be like, "Oh no, I've got a copy of the same rule book, but it says something different." It's all that sort of stuff. He could never show it. He never got his rule books with him. He'd argue everything. I started running a game. Because our regular DM couldn't make a few sessions, and I said to them, right, it's probably a 2 or 3 month campaign. I need you all to make characters that are going to be helpful, because you've got to do the right thing in this adventure. And I haven't got time to write anything else. I've got this already prepared. I've run it before a couple of times. It's gone down quite well. So off you go. Make some characters. And he messages me. I want to make a paladin. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Chaotic Evil one, playing 5th edition. I was like, no. You've completely ignored what I suggested. And he produced these stats, and it turned out that we were rolling stats using a message board dice roller. And the guy who was admin of the message board revealed that this was probably the 5th or 6th set of stats that he'd rolled, and he'd rejected all the ones before and tried to delete the evidence. And he ended up with, I said, no, you're going to roll the set of stats in front of me, and you're not going to play a paladin. And he ended up playing this wizard with quite poor stats. And he, right from the very start, I'd said to them, I don't want any arguing about rules because you're just wasting our time. We pay to rent this room, so spend as much time as possible playing rather than arguing. And don't make a character that's going to make me go delving into the rule books to try and find if you're pushing things. If you think you're pushing something, just assume you are and don't do it. He designed his character around the idea that he could get around the casting cost, this is 5th edition, of Find Familiar, by arguing that the brazier it uses is permanent and portable. He could use foraging skills to find the expensive herbs that the casting uses, despite the fact that the rulebook says all spell components are free and considered to be freely available unless they have a specified value. And Find Familiar has a specified value. It's about 50 gold pieces, which is going to be tough for low-level characters to find every time they want to cast it. So he was trying to get around casting Find Familiar as the whole core tenet of his character, so that he could morph his familiar into whatever would be most suitable for the environment. If he wanted to go scouting, he wanted an owl up in the air, or a weasel on the ground, or maybe a bat for caves. And he was trying to cast this spell as a ritual, not use any spell slots or anything, 6-7 times a day. So he's effectively trying to make himself a wizard eye or a floating servant that could go up in the air to scout everything all of the time. So, of course, he's gone straight against me saying to them, don't try and bend the rules. Don't try and break anything because it's just going to waste time. And it started causing arguments. And I basically said, look, no, you can't do it. Can't do it. I'm not going to let you forage for the herbs. It specifies a value on there. You have got to spend that amount of cash each time you cast it. I'm not going to let you get around it. And he started moaning about his choice of spells. So I started putting in a few spell scrolls for him to learn new spells, to add to his spellbook, give him more choice. And he was like, well, I don't want that one. I don't want that one. I don't want that one. And his character became the sort of, he got to the point where you could tell he just didn't want to play, but he was turning up to troll everybody. And he's the sort of character who would just sit down and refuse to adventure. He tried to argue that in order to gain information from people in the local town, because his character had a very low charisma, it didn't matter that he was neutral good. He was unpleasant because he got a low charisma. So torturing children for information was perfectly acceptable. That's the sort of argument. Yeah. Because he wanted to try and capture a young girl from the village to try and learn about what was going on in the village by torturing her.
Sounds like a peach.
So we ended up not playing that campaign, and he was kicked out of the group for constant arguing, turning our game forum into just an absolute shit show every week, arguing about every aspect of the game. And we just decided that he'd been okay with the previous DM. He just seemed to want to derail my game. Didn't like being told no. And I should have picked up. I should have picked up on it sooner. I should have picked up, and I probably would now. I probably would pick up on it a lot sooner now. But having experienced it that one time, but the sort of play you need to recognize early on and just go, you're not playing. I ended up telling him in the message board, I will not DM a game for you again. Simple as that. And it was about a week after I'd said that everyone else was like, that was just sticking out of the group.
Yeah, I do have a problem player story. I mean, it was fun to watch while he was doing what he was doing, and ultimately I got to smite him with an actual god. So in game, so it was fun. This guy liked to play thieves, and clearly there's no bad blood because he did name his game store after me when he went on in real life and opened up a game store. So I clearly, he had fun and we had fun. So calling it a horror story is not accurate, but he was sort of a problem player. It's the same guy who played the giant. But yeah, so he had this thief character for the longest time and played the thief pretty thiefy, but at one point his thief ended up really poor in the game, and the rest of the party would not support him because he had been borrowing money from the party or most of the campaign and spending his money poorly. And so while they're on their way to the city, actually this is the same thief who was in the story with the evil cleric and the demon lord. While they're on the way to that city, he is like, okay, well, I'm poor, and they come across. I rolled a random encounter, and it's like a cleric or a friar or something like that. And so rather than have it be like a battle or anything, it was a chance for an NPC, right? You run into an NPC. So while the rest of the party is talking to this friar, that they run into this friar who's bathing in a pond off the side of the road. But they come to his attention because his cart is broken on the road, and so evidently the friar has decided to clean up while he's waiting for help, right? And so the rest of the party goes to talk to the friar. They're doing the usual, oh yes, we'd be happy to help you out, blah blah blah. The thief at this time though is stealing the friar's robes and his holy symbol from where he's got them hung up. And this is with a note pass and stuff, so the rest of the party doesn't know. And so they leave, and after helping the friar, and they get on their way because they're like, enjoy your bath. We'll go fix your cart while you're enjoying your bath, and we'll have it ready while you're done. And so they go to the city, and he's still broke. So he decides he's going to don the robes of the friar and his holy symbol and masquerade as a member of the order and go to the local church to get room and board. So he goes there, and he, basically comes in. He's all humble, brother. I'm just a traveling friar seeking hospitality, and so they put him up for the night and they give him food and everything. And on his way out, he's like, "Is there anybody else around in the main chapel?" I'm like, "No, everybody's busy doing their daily stuff." He's like, "All right, I'm going to go over and I'm going to empty the holy water basin into a bunch of vials I have, and I'm going to steal the big holy symbol off the altar, the big gold holy symbol off the altar." I'm like, "All right, roll it," right? And so he does it, and they're traveling along, and they end up running afoul of a gang in the city. And for whatever reason, this thief thought that he could pull this off. And so, like I said, I just kind of laughed and rolled with it. He's like, "I'm going to try and heal this party." One of the party members got clobbered in the fight. And he's like, "I'm going to try and heal him." And I'm like, "You're going to try and heal him? You don't have any healing ability." He's like, I'm going to pray to the god of this order." I'm like, "You mean the god that you've been ripping off and masquerading?" And I'm like, "Okay, roll it. If you roll really good, I might." And so he does so. And because I wasn't going to punish the other party members, because the rest of the party's like desperate, because I think it was their cleric who got thrashed. And so the healing guy is down, right? And so he's like, "Okay, I'm going to try and heal him." And so he rolls poorly. He doesn't roll well enough. We were using some homebrew divine intervention thing, or maybe from Dragon or something. It's been a while. And so I wasn't going to punish the other player. And I'm like, "Okay, well, you heal him. You now take every point of damage you healed as damage." And mind you, they're high-level characters. The only reason he didn't, and this is a cleric who's got a substantial amount of hit points to begin with and has already gone down. And he basically almost bled out in the middle of the street. The only reason he didn't die is because the cleric was now alive and was now up and going and decided to save him. But it's like, dude, seriously, you're going to try and masquerade as a member of the order that you just ripped off like twice. You stranded you ripped off the friar's clothes, and then you robbed the church, and then you're going to call out to their god for help.
Yeah, you're going to get some form of retribution, aren't you? There, it's going to be painful, and I think you did the right thing.
Yeah, actually, what's funny is it had to have been, at least the curse part was probably due in part to a Dragon article. It was just after one of the Halloween issues had come out, and I had read the article on divine curses and decided, hey, I might as well play with this.
Yeah. Maybe that's where you get your inspiration from, isn't it? Just little bits and pieces. You never know when they're going to crop up.
Oh yeah.
I think his whole plan of stealing the robes and going in and getting food, bed, and board there, that was fine. It's just when he came to robbing the place afterwards.
I'm gonna have to jump here. It's been a lot of fun. Take care.
Cheers.
All right, so if we're going to talk about some horror stories, these aren't my horror stories. These are my friend who usually tells me what's been going on at his games.
Those are fair game.
Yeah, well, he had the party, and I understand some actions between younger players, but his wife, his real world wife, and he's DMing. She plays as part of this order, and if any kind of enchantment's considered evil. So that's the base that they're playing in their game. One of the players gets this book of enchantment, pretends he doesn't have enchantment, decides to steal from another PC. He decides to cast this enchantment. Of course, his wife's character, being part of this order, the first thing she does, because they're all just met, decides to side against them and says, hey, we can't do this, blah, blah, blah. The player gets angry, knowing that this is set up in the world. And then he starts saying, why did you side with her? You're supposed to side with me. I'm the player. I'm like, you're going after some guy's actual wife who was role-playing correctly because you wanted to be evil. Sorry, Leaves and Miss just went over for that. But no, it's...
You're multitasking by the looks of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it was... But he told me about that one. And I couldn't believe it because the player's a 60-year-old guy. And I said, at this point in your life, you should know better. If you haven't learned the skills, like there are some things I'm willing to accept with younger players, take them aside and say, hey, this doesn't make it. But man, if you haven't learned by the time you're 60, nothing I'm going to do is going to change you at this point. So yeah, he kicked me from the group, and that PC now became an NPC. So that's one he did. I'm trying to think of, there were some others he did. Apparently, I got along with everybody, but they had a falling out over something political, and they started screaming at each other. And I went, really? Usually we just go, hey, it's political, keep it out. We don't care. Yeah. But it was. I mean, it seemed out of character for this. I mean, he was a young kid. He was like 22, 23. It seemed completely out of character for him. Started cursing everyone, yelling, screaming, didn't talk to him for like months. And I went, what is going on? And usually there's something else going on in someone's personal life more than just the game when that occurs. So.
Or they've got an issue of some sort that is bubbling. I mean, mentioned a few people like that earlier who've got issues that were bubbling.
I had no problems with the guy. I had no problems with any of it, but it seemed totally out of character for how he normally was. And I said, whoa, what is going, just hearing about this, and, they wouldn't talk to him. Apparently this had happened before where he got mad at something minor and just wouldn't talk to anyone for about a year. And then he'd say, well, is it okay if I come back? I'm like, yeah, okay. You've learned your lesson. Come on back.
But it's obvious he hadn't learned because it all came to the fore again.
I mean, to be fair, at least in this country, we went through quite a phase of some really highly charged emotions regarding socio-political issues. So I don't know when this occurred exactly, but I know that more than a few fights and dismantlings of friendships and everything had occurred in the last few years in my circles.
Well, I mean, I can get pretty political in ignoring that aspect. We come to play. That's why we say no politics at the table, because at the end of the day, the reality of it is, regardless of what's going on in politics, no matter where you are, I would rather hang out with people and have a barbecue and discuss our differences than yell and scream and say, you're evil, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't do any good. And anyway, and I'm not going to get political, but that's the whole point. Look, we come here, we bring food. I understand there are sometimes moochers, but that was just weird. And like I said, it was totally out of character for this person normally. Now, maybe like you said, there's home problems, things like that.
Yeah, that was more my point there is a lot of people were just really just stressed and stretched to the point of breaking. I know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not excusing anything, and I wasn't there, and I don't know these people, but yeah, I've seen that, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's one of those really hardcore situations that you feel bad about because, like, what's going on? Kind of like my first story I started out with. I'm sure my buddy was going through some stuff, and I almost kind of think I know what he was going through. But he wouldn't talk to me, and he decided that he was going to make me the devil in his own personal hell. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, like you said, and that's, to be fair, one of these I'd gone out I guess he turned 23 at one point. He wanted to invite people to come over to his birthday. I said sure, and I was almost twice his age, and this is what, and I hate saying that because this really does reflect on gamers as a whole. Guys, go out and exercise. When a 46-year-old man can outrun you and he's out of shape, something's wrong.
And he was 23. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were playing paintball and he literally fell down from exhaustion, running across. And I said, I was just like, get some kettlebells, do something. Come on, guys, we can do better. It's one thing to say, look, I'm 50 and out of shape. It's quite different when you're 23 and you're like, look, I'm out of shape and you're even worse. So, yeah.
But our hobby is not one that's necessarily conducive to physical activity.
No, that is true. In fact, it can get in the way of physical activity, can't it?
Yep.
And certainly when you've got a table full of various snacks and fizzy drinks.
Even if those snacks are like perfectly reasonable actual food, it can still go wrong.
Of course it can. Yeah.
Well, does this count as a problem player? Because I used to bring ice cream over to my friend who is diabetic. I would ask, and he'd say, "Sure, go ahead and bring it." And I'm like, "No, I could," but no, I mean, but that's what we always did. Is we always had a full meal. So
one talking about bringing food. That last guy I mentioned, the one we ended up kicking from the group.
mm-hmm.
We used to take our own things to snack on from time to time. I didn't used to take very much. At the time, I was we're going back probably 5 years, so I was almost certainly constantly watching my weight for judo purposes. So I used to buy myself a couple of cans of 0-calorie fizzy drink or something and just sit and sip on those because I didn't want to eat while playing. And he used to turn up with all manner of odd snacks. And it all transpired that he was going to a food bank because he was poor, helping himself to as many snack foods as possible, bringing them all down to our gaming sessions, and then trying to buy our favor by giving out food. But he'd got it from a food bank.
Yeah, it's a little harsh.
It's like, the first thing, there's no need. You're not asking you to bring food down, but certainly that's not the point of a food bank either.
So allow me to shift gears to a humorous, positive note. Not positive. Call myself out on as a bad DM here for a moment. I committed the cardinal sin of killing my little brother's first character on his first game of D&D with me on his birthday.
Go on then, details. We need details.
Well, I mean, it's short because the session was short. So a little bit of background. My brother and I are 6 years apart. He's my little brother. And so we had a very close relationship. We never really fought much. We may have sparred mentally, because he's a super bright kid, very genius-y, and he always wanted to play RPGs, and I started when I was 8, and always felt that I got into them maybe a little bit soon, and so I always told him, I won't run a game for you until you're 10. Now he had done an end run around me and just started buying his own books and stuff and started running his own games anyways. So 10th birthday comes along, he's jazzed because now his big brother's going to run a game for him. And so he's there with all of his friends at his birthday party. We'd all made characters. And I go and and I did not kill him. The dice did. But I didn't not kill him either. And so he got upset, ran away from the table. I'm pretty sure he was just embarrassed and stuff. He's 10, he got killed, he's frustrated. It was all the excitement of the moment probably welled up and stuff. So he went up, running upstairs. He was upset, and I got in trouble because our mom's like, "Why did you do that?" My mom never had any problem with me playing D&D or anything like that, even through the satanic panic. She's like, "That wasn't cool. It's his birthday. Why'd you?" I'm like, "I didn't kill him. The dice did." But yeah, So yes, that was the story. I killed my brother's character in the first game I ran for him on his birthday. So I'm a bad DM.
Yeah, I've just seen a comment where it gets personal.
Yeah.
Jeb says he had a player use his PC as a proxy for his ex-wife as they proceeded through their divorce. Every time she did something to him, his character would do something to the rest of the party.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, yeah. That's that's probably where the paranoia would be a better place to be.
Definitely a game of paranoia for that. Yes.
I'm gonna say something that actually turned out really well. But we were playing, I guess it was a game of Dark Sun or something like that for D&D, and someone got fed up. I don't remember what it was, and they grabbed their character sheet and they rolled it into a ball, and then threw it at the DM, which of course ensued into all sorts of madness. Where we all decide to grab as much paper as we can, and we start throwing the little paper balls back and forth at each other. We turn over the furniture, so now it becomes like a fort as we're shooting over from one to the other side. And my friend finally goes over and says, "Let's get him," and crosses over the turned over sofa and charges the other side. And we had a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but I'm thinking, well, that did not go as planned.
And we had one time playing Warhammer at a local shop that was right on a highway. And one of our players got this guy we affectionately called Redneck John. There were 3 or 4 Johns at the shop, regulars at the shop. So we had Redneck John, we had Ratskin John because he was playing Ratskins in Necromunda. We had Little John, who was like one of the kids who would come up to the shop. And, so anyways, Redneck John got PO'd because his dice were rolling horrible. Scooped up his dice, walked to the door of the shop, and then threw them over across like 4 lanes of traffic. I'm like, I just imagine some poor driver as a D20 cracks their windshield.
It's like a golfer hurling their clubs into the lake.
He did not like things not going his way. I remember playing in a game against him directly and just watching him fume as I killed the same tank twice because I killed it once and then he played some card that allowed him to bring it back on the edge of the table, and he brought it in right next to the same guy who had killed it the first time, and I'm like, all right, and I just killed it again.
This is how I used to weed out dates. I used to take them miniature golfing to see if they would get angry.
One game session horror story that we laugh a lot about was a couple of years ago. We were playing at one guy's house, and we had to play there because he got 2 young kids and his wife worked awkward shifts. And one week he did have a habit of enjoying a drink while we were playing, and he sometimes took it a little bit far, but nothing really too bad. But one week he was sat there grinning and he'd got himself some dodgy cookies.
Special cookies. So while we were sat around the table drinking tea and eating some regular cookies that one of the other guys had picked up from Subway, he munched down his special cookie. He bought 2. He bought one for himself and one for his wife. His wife had a couple of bites of hers because she just got home from work and she was like, "I'm tired. I don't want any more of this. I'm going to bed." And she just gave him the rest of her cookie. This was about 45 minutes to an hour after he'd eaten all of his, and nothing had happened to him. Oh, so you got to wait for those things.
Oh, no.
And so he got the remainder of his wife's cookie and ate it. I'm not saying biscuit because we have a difference in this country between biscuits and cookies.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the difference is. So I was just curious.
I know a biscuit is what we call cookies.
Yes. Specifically over here, cookies tend to be a lot larger, quite soft, chocolate chips and things like that in.
Yeah, that's still a cookie over here.
Yeah.
But biscuits tend to be like your custard creams and things like that. I don't know if you have custard creams over there.
Yeah, Oreos and stuff like that, basically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, an Oreo would be classed as a biscuit here. Yeah,
Yeah, it's basically it's almost like a cracker that's sweet. Is I guess
Yes.
a biscuit.
Yeah.
It's size wise. But yeah.
And anyhow, so he finishes off this other cookie, and about 20 minutes later, he goes quiet. He doesn't really partake in the session for about 30, 40 minutes. But it's fairly obvious his eyes are rolling. And we're just continuing playing on. He's just sat there grinning inanely with his eyes all over the place. Then all of a sudden, he stands up and projectile vomits all over the player who was sat next to him.
Oh, God.
Oh.
And then he's completely out of it. And he's got this ripped old t-shirt, and he lifts the t-shirt off and up and starts vomiting into it. And he's catching it all, and he's just sort of swaying, and the guy next to him has got all vomit down the side of him. And
did it start a chain reaction?
And we were like, and obviously it's splattered. We're cleaning the board and cleaning the dice and everything because bits have splattered everywhere. And he's making a racket, and he's off to the toilet, and he's throwing up in there. And he tries to come back in and throws back up in his t-shirt again, and that gets dropped on the floor with this big sort of slop noise. And he's all over the place. and yeah, his wife, obviously hearing the noise, comes downstairs and says, I think that means it's game over. And we were like, yep, so do we. So do we. And we clear up, she helps, and he goes up to bed and just crashes out. And apparently he spent the next 3 hours trying to get something from his missus while reeking of vomit.
Oh.
Yeah, she told us all about it a week later.
Yeah, that almost counts as like you're not allowed back into the game unless you pass a drug sobriety test.
It was his house. It's his house where we were playing.
Oh.
So another story I have that's not so much a bad DM or a bad player story. It's a bad gaming experience story.
Yeah.
Used to game at a game store, local to me, like a lot of folks, right? And I had managed to get a pretty popular and pretty successful Champions game going on. It was really fun. Had a core of really fun characters. We had actually gone through a bunch of adventures already, and we were just having a good time. And we're playing in the store when the store owner had this thing where basically he would never tell interested parties no. Like if you had a customer come in who heard about a game, he would not tell them no because he's like, I don't want to piss people off and turn away potential customers.
Right.
So we're already at like 5 characters in the game, which is a pretty decent sized superhero team, right? Yeah. And Champions being kind of I don't know if you've ever played Champions or the hero system at all and everything. It can handle that pretty well, and because it's built for superhero teams, which generally speaking are not overly numerous, right? And as far as their members, at least active at any given time, right? Yeah, you might be the Avengers and have a membership roster that's like 250 people, but
you're out and about in teams of 4 usually.
Exactly. So I come into the next session. I'm all ready to run the game. I have 6 new players waiting for me.
Yeah. And they're all new.
Oh, you're still there, Spate?
He's gone silent.
Uh-oh.
I thought it was me had gone for a moment.
No, he was in the middle of it and just stopped.
Well, he'll be back in a minute, I guess. That cookie story continued the next week. when I introduced two. One of the greatest biscuits in Britain is the hobnob. It's a traditional. It's a great biscuit. It's fantastic. A week later, the party encountered two Hobbit brothers, two little halfling brothers, called Hob and Knob.
Okay.
So we continued ahead, and Knob is a slang term for someone who's an idiot, and Knob was an idiot, and he did everything to excess, including drink and do things that he shouldn't. And it was clear that I was modelling it exactly on that player from the week before, and he was man enough to laugh about it and understand it was it. The whole group got the joke, so that's the way to do it. Though, just make fun of it, laugh about it, move on, and I think Nob's still alive in the game. Unfortunately, poor Hob, who was quite a pleasant chap, he perished.
I mean, I'm just trying to think. Most of the problem that I had with players is just they didn't care. And when you have few players, you're happy to get any you can get. But boy, once you get enough, you're just like, nope. And then also you start becoming very picky, which to me is both the good and the bad of being on the internet now. So you can say.
I think what I tend to have found, though, I mean, I've in the last year or two, I've gamed with quite a lot of people on Discord. New people, just one shots and just short campaigns and what have you. And because I seem to have got myself ingratiated in a community where we're here for the gaming and we tend to like a lot more old school sort of stuff, everyone's been great.
Even though we all, well, I say we all, but a lot of us complain about the whole social justice stuff, even when I've played with such people, and what I mean is that they're fairly sensitive towards this stuff.
Yeah.
It really hasn't come in because they're like, oh, well, we have to worry about this. And do you have your pronouns? I said, look, I'm almost 50 years old. This is what I'm going to say. Like, oh, okay. And for the most part, if you're disrespectful for people, which again comes down to politics, at the end of the day, regardless of what it is, this is what I try telling my son. Talk to people about why they believe in something, and they'll tell you why. And it's not you're making a caricature of them. And I said and you'll find most people are pretty decent. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't had any issue with social justice types in any of my games. The group I play with on a Monday, they're all younger than me, and I know at least two of them have very different political outlook to what I do, but it doesn't come into the game at all. And they have openly said that certain situations with the game and the way D&D is changing, all that, it makes them despair as well, because even though they lean left quite a long way leftwards politically, they don't agree with all of that, because they'd rather just be mature and adult about things.
Well, and
I seem to have left and come back in the middle of a different conversation.
Yeah.
My power went click, and suddenly, it was back. So,
we were talking about it for problem players as much as everyone was talking about the social justice types.
Oh,
I really haven't encountered, even though I know people are politically very different than I am, really any real problems. As long as you treat, and this is the problem that I have with even all these people, like, oh, they're like this, or talk to someone and you'll find out different experiences, and you begin to understand, to see and how people are thinking. And that's my whole point of, I'd rather just have a barbecue. I don't care, about your politics. If you have good ribs, we're fine.
Yeah.
I have plenty to say on that, because that's pretty much my whole family.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually a very left-leaning family, household, and all the way up to my mom and my grandparents even, but what's funny is, I've got trans son and I've got a non-binary child, and even still talking to them, my son rolls his eyes when he hears about some of the problems that people have had. He's like, that's just dumb. And part of that is because, of course, we raised my kids were brought up with critical thinking skills and and stuff like that. So I mean, it's all well and good, but we're talking about earlier sharing other people's horror stories. I have a buddy who, I won't name him or anything like that or say where he's from because I don't necessarily want to get him in trouble.
Okay.
But he has the worst luck in this situation. I mean, I don't know if there's anything he's doing to make this happen. I don't want to assume that, but he has been cornered by people at game stores saying, you have to have this in your game, you have to have that in your game. If you're not, you're bigoted and blah blah blah. And and he's like, I just have NPCs. Is like, and for example, he was cornered and confronted for not having queer NPCs in his campaign, just to name something specific. And he's like, you don't know if they're queer or not. What are you walking around the village of Hamlet asking everybody if they're gay?
Because obviously 99.9% of the time it's not important to the adventure.
Well, not to mention in real life,
Exactly.
walking down the street, you don't know. And it's not important.
It's not your business. It's not of your business either.
And he was like, and they're like, well, you have to. And he's like, I don't have to do anything, and and he's a totally chill dude. I mean, like, and just like myself, I've never had these problems. Of course, I also live in the, lived for the longest time in probably one of the, in the Pacific Northwest bubble where everything is much easier going. But I grew up with every shade and every denomination and every delineation at my table. It's funny. I've had gay guys in my games who played straight characters. It's like, I mean, I was renowned or infamous as a kid for always wanting to play female characters, and they're like, "Why do you always play girl characters?" I'm like, because if I play a dude, I end up playing myself.
Well,
because I just it was a way to separate. But it's funny, so many people get all hung up on it, and at the end of the day, I mean, yes, it's important, and yes, I acknowledge the troubles and the trials and the tribulations of people, but we're all here. Especially with me, if you're at my table, you are my friend, because I don't play with strangers. I don't.
Well, that's how we got onto this topic, because we talked about playing with strangers.
I've never played role-playing games with strangers, and the strangest I've ever got is meeting other gamers I knew, already knew. Like, hey, come play with my gaming group, and so I get there and I already know two people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the problems that I've it's not that. I think it's weird, for number one, which is, I think that all too often, and to be fair, I think it's fairly younger people also, where they're trying to find on who they are and they don't really know, and they think that you have to do whatever, and it's just like the power gaming fantasy. Like, look, if you have the ability to play whatever you want, race, sex, whatever, why do you care? I mean, because it's one thing to say, hey, I'm stuck in my current body and I wish I was X. But that's the whole point of role playing. Yeah. You know what? If I'm going to do this, then, let me be this. Okay. And if you really want to, if we're going to talk about Dragonlance, if you're really worried about being trans, then be an Erda, which can be just about any sex or race they want to be. And because they're shape painters.
On the flip side of that, I get tired and really, really, really tired of old school gamers acting like this kind of stuff being in D&D came out of nowhere. I mean, we all know the original description of Corellin Larathan, who's described as being male, female, both or neither. It's not new, right? And people have been writing that stuff forever.
And what year did that book, Datas and Demigods, come out?
Something.
Yeah, 80. Yeah, about 80, 81.
Well, that, and the whole girls, and I mean, I remember one of the longest, our oldest arguments was women in gaming, right? But that for the longest time, I mean, I've even known people who are like, man, girls at the table. I'm like, what are you, 12? And me and my gaming group, we would have loved to have girls at our table when we were teenagers.
It's just
we just could never find any, because in the 80s, girls were very much pushed to do girl things.
Yes, yeah.
And guys were pushed to do guy things, and this, you didn't find dude bros at the table very often either. Although we did. My friend's older brother was on the football team and was a jock, and he played D&D with us. He also played a dumbass character named Bogey, who tried to sleep with the Hill Giant's wife and instead of the Hill Giant Hill Giant chief. And
well, speaking of which, is we had. Yeah, you're right. It was kind of, because I was thrilled if women were interested in playing. I was like, oh my God, Vampire! This is where apparently all the women go to role playing. But I was quite thrilled, even though other people talk about this, seeing 5e having a lot of women come in. But I remember we had in Shadowrun, we had one girl. We're talking almost 25 years ago or so. We were quite happy to have it, and I don't think that we're doing it. The problem that you always get is the overly creepy guy who's trying to come over and like, oh, I can do this, and you can tell like he's uncomfortable, and you kind of have to say, stop it. Or the same thing of the other talk about players, a little bit different when you play at your friend's house and he has googly eyes over his sister, and you're just like, yeah, exactly, we're like unicorns, but he has googly eyes over his sister. Like, dude, play the game. Focus on the game, and you can worry about her later.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, back before D&D in 1976 or 74, whenever Star Wars came out, I can't remember off the top of my head. I should be flogged for forgetting. But I remember getting teased a lot because I was hanging out with a girl who liked Star Wars. But I mean, my mom worked good and hard to make sure I didn't grow up with those hangups, so, she had the biggest collection of Star Wars figures in the neighborhood. Of course I was playing Star Wars with her. Yeah. She was a Turbo fan just like me, it didn't occur to me to do that. I mean, and of course, I mean, we've all been there where, I remember making jokes with friends about, the kind of, you run into the stereotypical girl gamer who was like, I am Shandara, the elven princess, blah, blah, blah. And, that was the stereotype back then. But yeah, then again, all the dudes are like, yeah, I'm Conan, or I'm Sir blah, blah, blah. We were all stereotypes.
Yeah. Well, and the problem that I had was, you talking about this, is they act like it was, the girls didn't play any of the games I played anyway. Didn't play marbles, didn't play, it wasn't that.
They were literally pushed away from that. Girls, I mean, and the sad part of it is that back in the 80s, girls were encouraged not to really use their brains either, which is, why only the nerds were playing D&D. Right?
Well, I'm going to disagree.
Or the stoners.
Well, I'm going to disagree, because plenty of the girls I knew were plenty smart.
Oh, no, I'm not saying they weren't smart. I'm saying that they were often pushed by societal pressure, their parents, and everything else, to shy away from that part of themselves, or not openly display it.
I did not see that when I was a kid, and we used to. And to be fair, this was one of the best things we ever had. So I was in Germany. We had quadrangles, and so they were.
You're also in Germany.
Well, no. This was an American military post where they had all these families. And we had this giant playground, and I kid you not, it was probably 120 feet by 120 feet, if not more, of just pure like sandbox. And they put all the playground stuff out there. The girls never were interested in what we played with, and it's not that we didn't interact. I mean, we would talk to each other, but we sort of didn't interact unless we were at school. And to be fair on some of this, I think the girls didn't like what we did so much, and the boys would do, all sorts of other stuff. It wasn't, I can't even think of that was discouraged. from what I saw so much. And as far as thinking, I mean, I dealt with the gifted kids, so they were, of course, encouraged to think. So
I would also submit that a military community on foreign soil is probably not the best cross section of Americana and regular normal civilian neighborhood society in America.
Well, I'll agree with you. I mean, considering that I walk to school every day, but when you looked at it, there were.
Oh, so did I. But
I mean, I'm looking at it. You probably had 12 families, and each of them had 2 to 4 kids, and then there were 4 buildings like that. And so we had this huge, and they were almost all the kids were under 13. I mean, that was, try playing Red Rover with all the kids. That was the one time that the girls would join us, is playing Red Rover.
Yeah, I will say, in my experience, I had been at plenty of parks or plenty of school things or plenty of birthday parties and stuff where, I literally would watch girls dragged away from having fun with other kids. No, that's not what little girls do.
Well, and probably I'm a little bit different because I remember my aunt and my cousins, and they were mostly tomboys, so they would take me fishing. So I didn't notice it.
Oh yeah. I mean, and my family is full of strong women, so telling a woman not to do something is a good way to get your ass kicked. That's, it's a family of 10, at my grandmother's level, they're like 10 siblings of a Depression era family where, they've all proved themselves. So no woman in that family was ever looked on as weak. But anyways, I don't know. We're way off track on as far as like.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to think of other players. I think part of it is, it's talking about a little bit of this, is societally, these people are made very fragile instead of being anti-fragile. And, they just can't deal with people thinking differently or doing something differently. It's the same thing with, they said in school, when the kids weren't going to school, made them more terrified of voicing their own opinions. And it's interesting seeing that. And, I really don't care one way or the other, but even, but for, like I said, with playgrounds, kids like to play and run around all the time. But yeah, who knows? Again, like you said, I was in the military community, so it's very different. But
I guess my experiences probably aren't the same as someone who is playing the game in a typical American sort of setting. I've got my local group of friends. We met through a shop, but we all pretty much very like-minded when it comes to what we want to play. And when I find groups online, I'm already in communities of people who tend to lean towards old school stuff. So I haven't had any real issues in the last couple of years after we ejected the couple of idiots from that one Saturday group, which is sadly not happening anymore.
I played Cypher, which keeps some of those, but I haven't dealt with that as much, even with the 5e people I've played with. I think unfortunately, it's only like 1 or 2% of people that are looking for it. And you're kind of like, okay, we know that they exist, but I haven't really met them.
They tend to, it probably it's a very low percentage. It's just, it's a loud group online, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think one of the comments that I've heard and I agree with and have even made myself is, I remember gaming back in the day being about playing somebody else, and a lot of people use it as a form of self-insert nowadays.
Yes,
and a way to express their and it's good and it's bad. I think in a controlled environment, in a controlled setting, it does make for good therapy, and it's been used successfully as a therapeutic tool. But it's kind of like any situation where you're self-medicating. If you self-medicate with D&D, you're probably not doing as well as you might have if you were had some guidance there, right?
As with my necromancer character, he was a piss taker myself. Every silly bit of my personality I was taking to the extreme, making it almost grotesque, but then I did portray him as a bit of he was the butt of jokes. He was an object of ridicule a lot of the time. So you've got to be able to, if you are going to self-insert, you've got to sort of do it in a dramatic way, and then be willing to laugh at yourself. Because if you put too much of yourself in there and get all offended, that's what I think that would cause problems.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I mean, it's a whole other topic for another time, I guess. But if we had D&D come out during the high point of the 60s, when there was a lot of social upheaval and stuff going on, I wonder if we would have seen similar things in D&D. But instead, it came out in the 70s, where things had started to mellow a bit from the 60s.
Yeah.
And it came out in the late 70s. So, because there is a parallel there. Right now, we're at an all-time high in social upheaval and social change and the evolution of society and people in general. And lo and behold, that's when we're having. So we can't say for sure, but I mean, if we want to theorize, I mean, it'd be interesting to see if, had D&D come out in the 60s instead of the late 70s, if we would have seen similar issues.
Well, I'll bring out a couple of things, because I've heard that men like objects and women like feelings kind of things. Is that when you look at the old D&D, it's very mechanical. It's the same as you don't find a lot of engineering women in engineering. Even civil engineering, which has the most, was only 25% women. And I think that they've really, again, I'm not saying it's bad. That's where I think Vampire brought in a lot of women. Because that was much more, well, and to be fair, if you listen to Jordan Peterson talk about porn, werewolves, vampires, pirates, billionaires, and surgeons are the top 5. I said, okay, it appeals to that group. And that's why I started seeing more women coming into the hobby. But then you get into, for 5e, and just looking at my friend and his wife, she's not in it for the big adventure. She's in it for the personal interactions, and I hate saying it, the shopping sprees. And so that's a little, I don't mean that in a bad way, but she'd rather get some of that. And that's why I've noticed that there's this difference. And I think that a lot of people are missing those aspects between them. Was, as a man, it's like, okay, what do I have to do? All right, I grew up on Conan. We'll look at what all the Conan tropes are. I grew up on all the Pulp Fiction, Flash Gordon, Edgar Rice Burroughs. So you get Tarzan and John Carter. That's what
King Arthur and characters like that from legend and all sorts.
Yeah.
Then and of course, there's exceptions, and it's probably not it's probably much more nuanced. I know, like, for example, my wife's been playing since 2nd edition, and she's 6 years younger than me, and she has been playing. We had a high school group, and she's definitely in it to kill things and get treasure and go on adventures. At the same time, she's also had to bow hunt for survival and things like that. So she's definitely in it. And she's the mechanic in the household. I'm not afraid to say. Yeah.
Well, and those are those outliers. Like I said, we had that one female, and I remember, which was interesting, because there are all people like, oh, I don't want any girls in there. I was always exactly the opposite. Oh my God, you're there. It's oh no. Yes, we will treat you well. And it didn't matter what you looked like. It was like, we have a female in the group. And then it was kind of like, hey guys, be respectful to her. And so we would do that kind of thing. And, it was always trying to be as welcoming and as accommodating. I think that you want to talk about problem DMs. How about the DM that has a crush on the girl and decides to give her all of the benefits?
Oh yeah.
And you just go, look, you're ruining the game for it. And then you have the same said girl that comes over and it's like, oh, can I do this? Where she's manipulating him, and you're just like, look, that's just a bad group. I'm going to be leaving. You're a bad DM.
Also see the DM's wife, the DM's girlfriend. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, my friend doesn't have any problems killing off his girlfriend, his wife now. And she's okay with that. So he doesn't tell her what the adventure is.
Oh no, I'm just saying is we're talking about the generalizations or the bad versions. Because I know plenty of people whose girlfriends are better gamers than they are, and their wives are, So but there is always that problem player / DM of the DM who spoils his girlfriend / wife / significant other, whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I will say now that I never came across that problem purely because the first time I ever played in a group with a female player was when I found my gaming stuff and started rebuilding it in about 2011 and taught my daughter to play. It was just me and her playing. That's different. But I joined a group a year or two later, and there was a girl in that group, and she was just the same as all of us in terms of playing.
Yeah,
she was one of the lads. Very much.
My kids have been playing pretty much all their life. My youngest started playing when they were 3, not D&D, but RPGs, and then like my oldest, I remember picking him up. Actually, originally I gave him all my old school books. You know, I'm like, here, I bequeath to you my AD&D DMG and my player's handbook and stuff. So it's funny, they all have his name written in them now, even though I still own them.
My kids won't play now. I mean,
he runs campaigns for 5th edition and stuff now too.
That's good. My kids aren't interested now.
My son wasn't interested even when we were willing to give him everything. Part of it is he just likes to run around, but it's hard to get him to sit down and play most board games as well. I mean, he'll sit and play chess, and he's known chess since he was 5. But
yeah, I mean, we had to play pretty rules light games with my youngest to begin with. I mean, obviously 3 years old, but they were incredibly thrilled to be able to play a frog.
Well, I have no problems. Like I said, it's my son he'll spend time on volcanoes, and I sneak him my my mythology stuff. Like, here, son, go ahead and read about the Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman. Here, read this, which is all the graphic novels, or So he gets some of that.
Yeah,
but
I had no choice but to be a turbo nerd because by the time I was 5, I had a book on translating dead languages, and like books on meteorology and zoology and geology, and I had a grandmother who would only buy me educational stuff, and so I thank her for the nerd I am today.
I had a spinning light up globe. I remember my little encyclopedia of dinosaurs. I had books on wildlife, trains, cars, all that sort of stuff.
My mother laughs
because my first atlas.
When I was a kid, I used to pull sources on my mom. Evidently, she'd, we'd get into some discussion about something. I'd tell her something. She'd be like, no. And I'd go, Mom, you're wrong. And I'd go upstairs and I'd get a book and I'd come down and like, look, it says here.
Well, see, my mother was always encouraged me to do stuff like that. The problem that I had was when I went to school and they would argue with me. I'm like, no, you're wrong. I came back with my dinosaur book. And I said, right here, it's this. And the teacher just looked at me like, oh, you insolent little 7-year-old. I was like, ah! I also remember, I guess it was 4th grade, reading about Atlantis and Mu. It's amazing on all the books they put in schools, because I got all sorts of books on, what was it, like vampires and werewolves. And
I had read everything on World War II by the time I was in 6th grade. Everything that I could find.
With me, it was dinosaurs, I think, for that. And I could recognize every species of bird in the British Isles by looking at it. And I knew the dates and the regnal numbers of every British monarch for about 1,000 years.
Well, I had to learn that in school, in 4th and
5th. We didn't, and I just learned it anyway.
Well, I thought it was interesting because that was part of our history class in 4th and 5th grade. As an American, I had to learn all the British monarchs.
And so you should.
And how much have I retained? Probably about 6 or 7. And I can really, it's the very famous one.
I've still got them all in the head. I can still reel them off. It's really quite sad.
Meanwhile, I could probably barely tell you all the presidents, but because I don't care, to be honest.
Well, I probably care more. It's funny because I care more now that as I get older than when I was young, because everything I wanted, like Middle Ages, Roman era. But some of that is that I wanted the high adventure, and I think that's part. When we talk about problem players here, everyone wants to be the hero and forgetting that it's a group game. It's not an individual game, and you can't.
It's funny you mentioned that, though. On the topic of problem players, I guess if my big thing as a problem player, if I'm going to call myself out, is I never really cared for being cool or necessarily even effective as a player character. I always like to play oddball characters, or we'd be playing superhero games, and everybody's wanting to make like totally competent superheroes, and I'm wanting to make Ambush Bug or something like that from DC.
I look back to how I was when I was in my teens, and I very rarely played. I was almost always a DM, and that was probably a good thing, because I think every character I would have made would have been evil, because I quite enjoyed playing the bad guys.
Well,
I think I'd have been a right troll and an awkward rules lawyer as well, because I learned and memorized everything. And I was right.
And that's where I think this age part starts coming. This is why I like Conan, because as a DM, I don't really have to remember that many rules. I just say, okay, this is what your difficulty is, and because it adjudicates it. Sometimes you get paralysis as a DM. Of, well, what should it be? Is it DC 15? Is it DC 20? Is it DC 10? Should I make it a DC? If you really want to get into it, is it DC 14, 15, or 16? If you really want to narrow it down, you're like, it really doesn't matter.
I only do DCs in increments of 5. I'm like, if I'm quibbling over 14 versus 15, and it hasn't already been printed on a monster, in a book, if I'm having to come up with it off the top of my head, 5s.
Well, but that's what I mean by this is, when as a kid, is I wanted simulationist games, and I used those rules as like a protection. And as I've gotten older, and I think this also comes down to having trust in your DM, is going over and saying, okay, do it. This is why, I'm like, go ahead and roll my die if you want. I really don't care. It's like, well, roll a dice. Don't tell me roll a dice unless I know what it's for, just because it bugs the hell out of me. Roll my dice if I don't know what it's for. Then I'll just move on and let's say, hey, do this. Okay, that's fine. I really don't, I'll even let you fudge my dice. Even if it's bad for me, I'm okay with that. But
meanwhile, I'm just the guy who's like, tell me what you want your character to do. I don't even care. Yeah. Don't tell me what, I'd rather you actually not tell me, what die you're rolling or anything like that.
I think there's part of that. I think that's, but I think that's a maturity level. And to be fair, I think almost all of us would be much worse off if we hadn't encountered these really bad players and DMs, or fact, we had been that way. These, someone that has never encountered this and had a great group, they would be completely lost and just like, and I was talking to my friend, admittedly, he's about 10 years younger than I am. Well, maybe about 7 or 8. Anyway, he is afraid to tell people no. And I said, his point was apparently with this new 1D&D where, a 20 automatically succeeds. I said, well, just because that doesn't mean you have a real success. His point was the guy was falling and decides to flap his arms. Well, if he rolls a natural 20, he can fly away. I said, no, that just means he flaps his arms. It doesn't mean he doesn't
Exactly, yes. He does a good impression of a bird. He does a good impression of a desperate bird.
Yeah.
A good impression of a penguin trying to fly, having fallen off.
Yeah, we'll see if that lasts, too. 1D&D is, after all, just a playtest.
I've heard it's a playtest, but I don't think that... I think that they'll put in things like, to be honest, looking at the 5th edition DMG, it's actually a very good book. If you actually want, the problem is no one reads it.
And everything's optional.
Well, but that's the point. It's supposed to be optional to give you the flavor that you want out of your game. But other than magic items, most people ignore everything in there.
Yeah, but the vast majority of players nowadays in 5th edition are very dogmatic and don't don't do optional, which is why you get a lot of, which is why I think we have seen a lot of stuff being very explicitly stated by some of the people in the game. To us older folks who've been in it for a while, we're like, just play the game you want. That doesn't occur to a largish percentage of the new players.
Well, can I also be fair on this though? Is how dogmatic were we when we were kids?
I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Oh, well, okay.
I was not.
I
was the DM, so I could be at times.
I was the DM, but I homebrewed the crap out of everything, and I invented new systems, and so I was a tinkerer.
I ran a mishmash of the rules anyway with them because I didn't really understand a lot of the AD&D rules when I was 13, 14. And I used to run
there's plenty of stuff that I didn't know.
I used to run basic a lot of basic D&D rules meshed in there, so I wasn't dogmatic at all.
And I think basic was really good for that, actually. I think that it removed a lot of the stuff that going back and looking at some of the old players' handbook, even though where, what is it, Gygax, one of the Dragon magazines went off. You need to play it. If you're changing any of the rules, you're not playing my game and blah, blah, blah. And it even says in there, throw out rules that are interfering with you having fun and having a game. I said, you were literally arguing against yourself. And I understand that that's probably from a money standpoint, but it's supposed to
trying to sell books.
Yeah, especially considering AD&D was kind of printed as a codification of the rules. I would say one thing that probably has informed a lot of that behavior is the lack of Dragon magazine, or at least a good version of it, because of course Dragon Plus was there for a while. So yes, nowadays there is a constant literal stream, and then also tons of YouTube channels of really good ideas, right? But they're all coming from people, right? Dragon magazine coming from TSR, even though they were talking about tons of optional rules and weirdness a lot of times, it still had that, and a lot of it was submitted by people.
Yeah,
because it was published by TSR, it had that air of at least semi-officialdom, where people were exposed to new ideas coming directly from the company. Whereas WotC right now is very specifically not doing that. They
do put out an online Unearthed Arcana for test material, though.
They do, but that's always stuff that they're planning to release on an upcoming product.
That's true.
It's a play test, and the thing is that there is no regular stream of interesting ideas coming from them in the form of new mechanics and systems. You might have a video on D&D Beyond on how to improve your blah blah blah. Or Mike Merles may show off the way he does initiative in his games, but at the end of the day, it's just somebody's idea. The official 5th edition party line is kind of, what's in the books, and then they have their de facto kind of like or their default answer, which is like play the game you want, but we're not going to really produce anything that truly supports that.
Well, part of the Adventurers League, isn't it? They try and make it as identical as possible to people who just Adventurers League.
I'm going to bring up, because I think that's true of a lot of people. As kids, I think us especially, since we're still in the hobby, we like different systems. We are like, oh, I like this system, or I like this system. I mean, John here's talking about Paranoia, and then you talk about D&D, and then you're talking about MERP. They're all completely different, about as different as you can get.
Yeah, cross-pollination of ideas from different games is a big thing that informs the...
And I think a lot of us, to be fair on this, a lot of us went through D&D and probably burned out of it. And then World of Darkness came along, which really flipped the whole game on its head, role-playing. But a lot of those players that were doing that went through 1st and 2nd, then 3.5, and then start bringing some people into 5, and we're just like, it's bland, it's not in there. But I've heard some players talk about, but again, that's what they call the session 0. Let's sit down and talk about it. And I found that most people are okay if you do this and you set down the ground rules beforehand and say, is this a game you want to play? It's whenever you have existing players that are, I want to say, they feel that the rules are a safety blanket around them, really prevent them from having any kind of change, because that's but I want, because they've optimized their characters under the current rules instead of trying to, how do I want to say, organically create their characters.
Well, instead of playing a character, they're playing a set of statistics,
and they've planned it all out as well.
And even if they haven't planned it, they're like Omen was saying, is that they're kind of couched in the rules. The rules will protect them. Their character was made by the rules. That's how they're going to play their character. And I mean, and to be fair, that's a valid way to play. Yeah, I mean, the rules are there for a reason, but you can't really. It's a kind of a sad way to play.
Or I want to say this. I have to agree with whatever Legion of Myth is around. And I always joke about it. You're playing the game wrong. Doesn't matter how you play the game. You're playing it wrong. I'm playing only wrong. You're playing it wrong. Well, I'm playing it like this way. You're still playing it wrong. It's what kind of wrong do you like? That's because I think there is no perfect set of rules systems. There's certain times you get in there, and that's why the more flexible the system is for me. And again, this requires a lot of trust about the DM. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was like pulling teeth to get people to try playing any other system besides D&D, because they had literally memorized the rules in there. Instead of saying, well, what's optimal? It was the same thing I heard about the problem with Pathfinder. There's an optimal choice, and then there's the cinematic fun choice. And D&D always had some of that, but I think that's part of the problem that you get.
Playing lots of game systems has, I guess you could kind of compare it to traveling, as a person, if you travel the world and expose yourself to other societies and other cultures, you have a broader outlook on people, right? And experiences and things, right? In general, if you're playing lots of game systems, the idea of flexing or doing things a different way or a way that are not in the rules is not all that foreign to you. It's because that there are other ways to do it. And I think a lot of the 5th edition players, again, going back to 5e, that's all they do. That's all they want to play. And they're very casual about it. So they're not getting that exposure. And so, they are not going to be as comfortable with other ideas because they're not exposed to them as often. You mean there are games that let you do blah 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 and nobody freaks out about it? Why, yes there are.
Well, and I'm going to bring up another thing though, which was unlike 2nd edition or first. I'm going to bring up 1st edition. If you look at the 1st edition books that were coming out, and I didn't like your Unearthed Arcana, but go look at the Greyhawk, and then the Dragonlance, and then the Wilderness Survival Guides, and the Oriental Adventures. They really expanded and changed the game a lot on how you wanted to play. And so when 2nd edition came out, you're like, oh, okay. And they took a lot of those same ideas, but it was still somewhat cross-pollinated. But I've noticed that the quality of releases now in D&D really seems to be kind of poor. Starting off with Tasha's and a few of the others, it's almost like they're afraid to say no in certain cases. Yeah.
What they're doing is that, I mean, it is very much a policy in the way that all the books have all the rule books have something for the players in them, and it's all about opening up more and more and more for the players, because they know that if they focus on giving things to the players, they've got a bigger market.
Oh, I agree, but I feel kind of bad because quality is what really keeps people there. And I've noticed that even my friend, who I think he played a little bit of 4E, he's big into 5E, has really the quality of the books has gone down for him. And he's just not been that impressed. And I said,
I think that's happened with every edition at some point. Even going back to 1st edition, I don't rate the Dungeoneer Survival Guide or the Wilderness Survival Guide. The late modules were poor. Then second edition came along, and the basics core second edition is absolutely fine, but some of the later stuff was dreadful. And same sort of bloat happened with third. Not wanting to edition war, but I just thought fourth was bad. And even, I mean, I thought fifth edition, just the core rulebook initially, was fine.
I think to be fair, the first 6 books, which are Volos, I guess the 3 monster manuals, effectively the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook, are excellent books for the most part. I mean, that I agree with. And to be fair, I like the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, or I liked the Wilderness Survival Guide because it included a lot of environmental impacts and effects that hadn't really been spelled out as much in first edition. I mean, the Dungeon Master's Guide mentioned some of them, but it really fleshed it out. But I never felt like you had to buy those books, which also helped. There was some non-weapon proficiencies that really came into those, to be fair, and I liked them from that aspect. But I didn't feel that I was like, oh, I have to have this or I don't have to have it. For the most part, you're like, okay, if you're going in the wilderness, get this book. If you want to delve underground, get this book. Greyhawk had some issues. I'm not saying it didn't, but Manual of the Plains I thought was an excellent book as well for the hardbacks. So I thought they were hitting on pretty much full cylinder. And I understood when Gygax left, they wanted kind of to cut a lot of the stuff from him. And I said, okay, so you can bring in second edition. And they had some good ideas in there. But I agree with you. Boy, when you started doing those different splat books for like the Fighter's Guide, it got way too bloated. And I left after that point. And I understand why they're doing that. But boy, I think that if they really did a good, heavily focused Dungeon Master's Guide 2 on this, I think that it would do very well for opening up some of these games. But I agree with you.
What's the point when most people haven't even read, as you say, haven't read the first Dungeon Master's Guide?
Well, and to be fair, investing in Dungeon Master book isn't not great for the business model anyways, because most people don't want to be dungeon masters.
Yeah.
So most support and most focus is going to go on making the player experience better, and most of the DM work seems to be going towards making tools to allow DMs to facilitate games easier. As opposed
I will say it now, and I'll be open about it. I think the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is the best Dungeon Master's Guide that's been done for a version of D&D since first edition.
I fully agree with you on that one.
It's got plenty of tools in there. It's just try and get anybody to actually let you use any of them.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, though, is I don't think I'd have too many problems getting it, as long as we start at first level.
But have you tried?
Well, the reason I mention it is that usually if you can get first level, everyone's okay because they know the rules up front. It's when you start changing their characters midstream, they become highly uncomfortable.
All right.
Because for me, let's say I wanted to use spell points. Okay, that's fine. But if I was trying to do that on their 4th or 5th level, they're like, no, you can't do that because I built my character this way. You're like, okay, I sort of understand that. Same thing with long healing. But I did this. But for me, throwing in certain things, like I said, okay, I'm going to get rid of certain spells. You can't use these spells. I think most players are okay with that as long as they have not built something under a certain assumption. And that's very hard for anyone to deal with, is going to it, which is why I think that this will be interesting, is you may see a big schism between 5th edition and I'm going to call it 6th edition, whether they like it or not. Is there maybe that schism? Because I'm noticing a lot of my friends, and actually I know Connell was on here too with the Cigar DM, they're feeling very uncomfortable with all these new changes coming down the pike. And again, it's not bad if you're going to start from first level, but it's going to be bad for any existing players, and the existing groups, until they start a new game, are probably going to stick with the old edition.
Well, my group I play with on a Monday, their main game is 5th edition. I mean, I do drag them away and play other things from time to time, but at the moment there's a couple of ongoing 5th edition campaigns, and my MERP game I started on Monday is just like a bit of a fill-in for when people aren't there. But they have all said that they're going to pay absolutely no attention whatsoever to the new D&D, which I'm quite glad about. I will admit. I don't think they've even. I don't know if they're even going to download it and read the free bits and pieces and read them. They're just not interested.
I mean, looking at it, my friend and I have talked about maybe it's even better. I don't know. It's one of these things that it's going to be hard unless the group wants to play test.
It's not going to be that much different than what we have already. I mean, honestly, I don't think it's going to be all that different. I think most of the changes that people are afraid, obviously, but most of the changes that I've seen really are things that we've already been seeing put into the game, or are variations of and refinements of things that are already in the game.
As you say, Tasha's things have come out of Tasha's a lot, haven't they? Regarding backgrounds and stuff.
And most of what I've seen happening is changing optional rules into part of the regular rules. Like feats, for example, are now just part of the rules. But the main real push on this is the business model and the direct support for online play. The game itself is not changing much. I mean, in fact, I from what I've seen, they have upheld the backwards compatibility.
I look at it as like the difference between first and second edition or even basic and AD&D. There's going to be some differences that may trip you up, but it's enough that you can run one or the other without any real problems.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be even...
As you just said there, Alfbait, I think, I said that a lot of the pushback is coming from the online, the digital nature. The fact that there will be a core game with lots and lots of tasty little things to bolt on and spend your money on.
Yes, but from what I've been reading, and if you read into it, none of it is required. It's to capture a market that's there, but it's not going to be required. Like, you can still play D&D without their homebrew virtual thing. But for those people who want to invest in it, and that's the thing, 5th edition up to this point has shown WotC that there is a large enough chunk of people willing to invest in bells and whistles for 5th edition that they need to now take a bite out of that pie. My brother, for example, buys the Beatles and Grimm deluxe versions of the 5th edition modules.
Oh, wow.
And so, he picked up the Icewind Dale one, and he picked up the Wild Beyond the Witchlight one. So he's picked up a couple of them, and he buys all kinds of third-party books on the art of DMing and stuff like that. And there are plenty of people who are willing to pick up high-end game screens and this, that, and the other. And what I really think we're seeing is WotC recognizing that there's a market for that and deciding to bring it in-house, as much of it as they can. And
or
they are
licensing,
and so they are also willing. One of the big things that's coming up with the D&D, was it not D&D Next? I keep wanting to call it by the old one, but the one D&D is, yes, there are microtransactions. They're talking about doing microtransactions, but from what I can tell, they're all in regard to the virtual game environment, skins, terrain packs, things like that. If you're using that already, those are going to appeal to you. However, I can still play D&D with Owlbear Rodeo, D&D Beyond, and and Discord.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've still got Foundry and all these others. I'm not saying that doesn't occur. I think.
But I'm saying that's where the fear. A lot of people are like reading way too much into it, because most of the push I've seen is coming there.
What will happen? Will those online tabletops be allowed to support the new version? We don't know yet, do we?
And that is the biggest shift you may see, is once WotC has the in-house options, are they still going to be willing to like allow Roll20 and stuff to have their things?
Well, you know what though, is like for Foundry, you still had to have D&D Beyond to hook in. So,
I mean, one of the cool things is it sounds like when you buy a physical book, you're just going to automatically get the digital version now.
No, you have to pay an extra $10.
Well, fine. I'd be willing to pay an extra $10.
It's one of these things that, again, I'm not really invested in 5e. I just think that it may split the player base. Like just about everything has at some point. I don't think it's going to be like what happened with 3, 5, and 4. which is the whole reason Pathfinder came about. But and again, I'm not invested one way or the other. I would like to see if there are good changes or bad changes in there. I think it's one of these things that, as much as we talk about, and I understand from a marketing selling point, but considering it's still a bestseller, I mean, what is it? Out of, if it even sells 100,000 copies, that's still in the top 0.01% of all books sold, is what I saw that sold over 100,000 copies.
The most legitimate concern I have heard to date in regard to this, though, is the potential damage that it will do inadvertently to other games, and that is, I can't remember. It wasn't something that I noticed. I was actually watching some blurb and have to agree with this as a potential problem. Is with them buying Drive-Thru RPG.
No, they didn't buy it. Roll20.
With them going in-house though, and changing to digital products, if they stop supporting Drive-Thru RPG, is what I meant. Sure. If for whatever reason they stop doing Drive-Thru RPG, there are a lot of games that benefit from the through traffic that 5th edition produces on Drive-Thru. So people come to Drive-Thru to look for D&D stuff and then notice, hey, there's a Cthulhu role-playing game. Or they go through and they're like, hey, oh, wait, wow, there's a game that lets me play superheroes. If that traffic stops getting directed to Drive-Thru, I mean, because I guess the Call of Cthulhu is, I guess, like one of the towards the top, like number 2, 3, or whatever.
I think it's number 2 in the world, isn't it? Behind it.
Yeah, but it's like a 3% market share or something like that.
Well, let's see. I'm trying to look at
because it's just insane. I mean, there's a good potential for them being hurt pretty bad by having people just not notice that they exist because, they're not looking at D&D anymore.
But here's the interesting thing, and this is what I find very interesting, and this is what we'll see. Looking at Drive-Thru RPG, they don't have anything basically from 4th or 5th edition.
Because that's all on DM's Guild, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just find that's one of those things that's kind of, it is in Dungeon Masters Guild. Aren't they having some other stuff? I'm not sure how it's all working. But yeah, you're right for some of these, but I'm going, okay. But yeah, it's still the same one bookshelf, like you said, for that. So and how's that going to work out? What concerns me is that they're going to do it and they're going to get rid of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd that's out there. And while that should be technically behind the one D&D, is they're just going to memory hold them, is my concern.
I have a feeling that WotC will continue, or Hasbro will continue to milk every last cent they can from D&D, so they will probably keep those older editions viable, because people who are buying those probably aren't going to be buying 5th edition or are also buying 5th edition. So I can't see that I can't see them killing secondary revenue streams that aren't actually hurting their primary revenue stream.
I would agree with you. Gut instinct says I would agree, but I have a feeling that they may look at it as, yeah, but it's not focusing everyone to our core product. And that's what concerns me from there. But the other thing is to me, if they were kind of smart, is you can call 1A D&D. Throw in all your other editions in there too. But, and say, okay, look, hey, we're going to bring in the 1st edition players along with the 2nd edition players with the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, and you can play any version you want.
Yeah, but Hasbro didn't become the giant that it is by being dumb and not reading their market. So, and so I'm pretty sure that if there was a reason to bring those folks back in, they would have already capitalized on it. But they can just keep selling those books. in digital form.
And of course, I mean the main core of those older guys like us, I mean, in a way, is will dig up. People will dig their heels in and say, "No, I'm not moving."
Well, and that's fair. It's just one of those things that it's one of those that if you really want to be all encompassing, oh look, we have all this stuff for you. If you want to come over, but I think that, and I've even looked at the art for Drizzt. But my feeling is, and I've been looking at it, is if you look at I know we're going way past this, but the fourth quarter or the last quarter of Hasbro, D&D lost 10% of its revenue from the previous year. Now, some of that is because they had licensed some things, but I think that they, and this is what all the new editions are for anyways, to revitalize interest in it. But I think
that's always been the case.
It is. Well, and I'm not disagreeing that sometimes you need an updated version, especially when you start getting rules bloat. I'm not necessarily against editions. I think part of the problem really comes down to that when you start looking at this, is they have to do something with D&D, because much as they talk about it, it's not selling like it used to. They've hit market saturation, I think, in many cases.
Well, part of that could just be because people have less time because things are going back to normal.
But there was licensing it. But I think that they have. Well, to be fair, it's been out 8 years? 2014, 2015. It'll be out almost 10 years. When they go to the next one, that's pretty much going to be market saturation in many cases, and so you have to revitalize that interest. So I think there's that. But the quality of the books, I think, has been going down. Just talking to my friends and looking at them, it's. I think it needs a refresh anyway, but I don't think that they're. In some ways, we're seeing like a lot of people don't want to have to switch, and that's going to be interesting on how many are going to switch. It's not like 4. I mean, there was a big cut between 3.5 and 4, and people said, "I want to play 3.5. Screw 4." And when 5th edition came out, that was a whole new, almost target audience that they were going to get into that one.
Well, they sort of looked out in a way in that YouTube was gaining popularity, and streamers such as Critical Role and what have you had got their core audience, and they jumped across to 5th edition, and it all sort of snowballed, didn't it?
Well, and look what they were playing on Critical Role. They were using Pathfinder originally.
They were, originally, yeah.
So they weren't even doing 4th edition. Now, I'll be honest. I liked Critical Role for the first season where it felt more organic. After that, it became too polished, and I remember them trying to hit 1,500 subscribers. So it's I was like, oh, okay, but yeah, it's but it's really
my biggest fear, honestly, is that their gamble won't pay off. D&D will stop making money, and then they'll just shit can it because they're Hasbro and they never let go of a property ever. Yeah,
well, I've heard some things. Well, my whole view is you can still license it off. I mean, that's what they do with Topps and Shadowrun. Is it Topps, WizKids? Anyway, whatever the top company is you license it off to someone else. I mean, that's what happened with Palladium.
Yes, but their licensing never goes as far or as great as the original. I mean, look at some of the G.I. Joe stuff that's been coming out, or the Transformers stuff that comes out. Those are also Hasbro properties. Sure. They always go to like premium collectible and not mainstream for their licensing.
Well, and that's true, but I can't imagine that. What are you going to do with books? Now, to be fair, Hasbro just spent $250 million or whatever for their D&D Beyond. So, to do their 1A D&D, we'll see. But I think the other problem is looking at and this may not be fair because I know they all read off a script, but listening to the people that are generally talking about D&D in their little blurb don't seem to be players. That's what gets me. Is there may be a couple of players, but a lot of them don't seem to be players, and I think that's part of the concern that you do have. Is if you look regardless whether you like Gygax or not, they were true players and DMs, and they dealt with that. And they may have gotten to it. Well, even when you listen to Larry Elmore, their artists were players. They're like, oh yeah, we play D&D, and then apparently they got rid of that in 2nd edition. I think that showed a bit in there. to me, if you're going to bring all your in-house people, they should all be playing the game.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of stories about everyone in first edition days playing the game after work or during work. It was part of work.
Yeah, it was, and I think that helped out with the Dragon magazine, like Elfbait was saying here. It helped inspire some things like, oh, okay. It gave them an idea of what works and what doesn't. I think that was a very good aspect from it. But I heard under Lorraine Williams, she didn't want anyone playing while they were there.
No.
And I think that you saw a lot of. It's not saying that there weren't imbalances. You saw much more skewed imbalances once you went over to second edition, and I didn't even touch. I have the core 3 books for 3.5.
I haven't. I am going to have to call it about now, because we're coming up to nearly 12:30 here. So it's that time of night when I have to bring conversations to a close. And we appear to have lost Elfbait again.
Uh-oh. Well, that sounds good. I need to go swim, so that's a good time for me too.
So I'm just going to put a thank you Elfbait in here, because obviously can't tell him because he's disappeared. Thank you, Elfbait. Time to end the stream because it's late and I'm knackered.
Yeah, well, all right, John, you have a good night. I appreciate it.
Thank you once again, as always, Omanel. It's always good to have you on. And Elfbait, if you do watch the end of this, thank you again. And Saxius, as always, very entertaining. We did stay on topic for about 2.5 hours, didn't we? Really, which is great.
Well, we still kind of circled back and forth between the until the last 40 minutes or so.
Isn't that the way it always goes? But thank you all once again, and thank you, chat. There's some people who've stuck it out throughout, or at least they may have been at the start and gone away and come back at the end and pretended they've been here. I've got no idea. But thank you everyone for joining in once again.
Have a good night.
Cheers, and I'll see you all in a week.